Chapter 528. Jean Wan immediately turned back to glare harshly at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's unperturbed gaze swept over her, as though saying, "What's the problem?" Jean Wan, ex-wife? Yan Gu was so shocked that even the short hair on his head stood straight up. He stared in disbelief at the man behind Jean Wan. Ah? So, the last time they sat together to eat beef noodles, they already knew each other. Furthermore, they were in such a relationship as ex-wife and ex-husband. It was no wonder that even though they knew each other, they pretended not to know each other. It seemed like the two of them did not get along well after their divorce. Since that was the case, after 2 days of investigation, they learned that this man was Mr. Mo. That was why the housekeeper at the Mo family previously addressed her as Mrs. Mo. Yan Gu felt as though a huge case had finally been solved. He scanned Mo Jingshan up and down several times. Mo Jingshan calmly and coldly glanced at him. Should a police officer who comes to take a statement have this kind of gaze and attitude? Hearing this, Yan Gu immediately put on a stern expression. He glanced at him awkwardly and then turned to Jean Wan, who was standing speechlessly by the door. "Sister Wan, is it convenient now? Can we go in?" Jean Wan was about to speak when Mo Jingshan's cold voice rang. "It's not convenient." Jean Wan, Yan Gu, the other police officer who came with Yan Gu, Jean Wan smiled and moved away from the door. She then turned to look at Mo Jingshan. Seeing that the man did not move and had no intention of letting them in, she turned to speak to Yan Gu. "From the perspective of a citizen and the police, we have to cooperate no matter if it's convenient or not. But why are you here to take a statement? Aren't you a SWAT trainee? Our boss Ling sent me here. This is the brother in charge of taking the statement. Someone discovered your car parked here during an investigation, so I came to take a look." Yan Gu smiled at Jean Wan, revealing a set of white teeth. "After all, I'm still your bodyguard. I have to pay more attention to your matters." Jean Wan tilted her head slightly and used her chin to point inside. "Come in. Thank you for your hard work." Yan Gu hurriedly signaled the police officer by the side with his eyes. The two of them were about to enter, but before they could step through the door, they raised their eyes to see the man still standing by the door with no intention of giving up his seat. The moment he met Mo Jingshan's cold and unwelcoming gaze, Yan Ji's expression became more cautious. He turned to Jean Wan. "Sister Wan, since you're an ex-wife and ex-husband, have you been living together for the past 2 days?" Jean Wan calmly replied, "Didn't I injure my head that day? You saw it for yourself. After that, I fell into a deep sleep for 2 days. When I woke up, I was already here. It's probably more convenient to take care of me here." Right now, Yan Gu was acting like a bodyguard again. Anyone who harbored ill intentions toward Jean Wan would be his #1 target. However, seeing that Mr. Mo didn't have the slightest self-awareness of being investigated by the police and didn't have any intention of letting them in, Yan Ji's expression immediately turned stiff. "In that case, after the statement is taken, Sister Wan, I'll send you home. It's not appropriate for you to stay here." Jean Wan nodded. "All right." Jean Wan readily agreed. She readily agreed, but Mo Jingshan raised his gaze to sweep a glance at her. "All right?" Jean Wan also glared at him. Anyway, there were 2 police officers by her side. Her reason to leave was also smooth. Why wasn't it good? This was simply too good. However, the man casually closed the door. Yan Gu, who was about to collapse into the door, was instantly slapped out. Yan Gu, whose nose was almost broken, stood outside the door. He then looked at the police officer by the side, who was equally dumbfounded. "The 2 of us, have we been chased out?" The police officer. "I'm not sure. I've just been promoted from an intern. This is my first time out. Speaking of which, is it so difficult to take a statement?" Yan Gu, inside the door, Jean Wan's expression was fierce as she watched Mo Jingshan, who had once again shut them out. She angrily said, "Mo Jingshan, are you crazy? Keeping the police outside? Aren't you afraid of being arrested and interrogated for a few days? Let me tell you, being disrespectful to the police and refusing to cooperate with them is enough for them to arrest you. The man coldly and indifferently said, even if you lend them 100 guts, they wouldn't dare. Jean Wan ignored him and reached out to open the door. The man casually placed his hand on the door, not giving her the chance to open it. While she was arguing, he lowered his head to look at the little woman who was struggling to tug his hand away to open the door. His voice was cold and clear as he said, "You've only lived here for a few days, but there have been quite a few people who have come to rescue you. I won't bicker with the assistant called Xiao Ba, but the brat outside isn't suitable to be your bodyguard. When you return, fire him. In the future, stay away from him. Why do you care who I hire to be my bodyguard? If it wasn't to ensure my own safety, why would I need a bodyguard by my side? Besides, the reason I hired him is because I almost got into danger last night. That's why I... Do you think I don't know that you were assaulted by a drunkard at night? Or do you think I don't know that you brought that Mr. Vince upstairs into your house?" The man's tone was indifferent to the point where there was almost no warmth. However, it was clear that when he mentioned Yan Gu and Mr. Vince, who she had barely contacted recently, his eyes were clearly filled with displeasure. Jean Wan's gaze faltered. She abruptly glared at him. "You sent people to follow me?" The man lowered his eyes to look at her. "If secretly arranging 2 bodyguards by your side counts as following you, you can think of it that way." Jean Wan was momentarily speechless. Did he arrange for people to protect her without her knowing? She had been so busy after returning to the country that she did not pay much attention to such matters. That incident with the drunkard was also because Mr. Vince was nearby and had rushed over quickly. As a result, she did not know that there was actually someone secretly taking care of her safety. Later on, she moved away in time, so she did not pay much attention to such matters. She pursed her lips and pointed to the door in front of her. "No matter what, you can't just lock Yan Gu and the others outside like this. In any case, they are police officers and have a mission. If you don't finish this statement today, there will be other police officers coming tomorrow. Sooner or later, you have to cooperate." His eyes seemed to be smiling, but they were cold. It was obvious that he was very repulsed and bothered by Yan Gu. Or perhaps, he was very bothered by all the men who got close to her. "You can cooperate, but after opening the door, you have to try asking him to take you away." Chapter 529. Jean Wan glanced at him. "Mo Jingshan, it's my freedom to stay or leave. I have no money, no cell phone, and no freedom here. Aside from eating, I only sleep. Even a pig can occasionally see the outside world. Why should I be restricted to this extent just because I'm recovering? You don't have money? No cell phone?" The man smiled ambiguously. "Do you need me to confiscate the things you've hidden under your pillow?" Jean Wan, what? How did he know? The man glanced at her again. "Are you planning to make me admit that I'm treating you like a pig and depriving you of your freedom? Hiding your cell phone under your pillow is such a clumsy method. Do you really think I don't know?" Jean Wan, she had always thought that an upright man like Mo Jingshan would not do something like searching under her pillow, so she kept her cell phone there without worry. She did not expect him to know. However, in her impression, he had not had the chance to touch the bed she slept on, much less the things under her pillow. Jean Wan thought for a moment. At the end of the day, she could only guess that it had something to do with the surveillance cameras in the corridor outside. Aolan International's corridors and doors all had high-definition surveillance cameras. This was not within her consideration. "I told you to eat, drink, and rest well here. Aside from not allowing you to go out to enjoy the wind, when have I really restricted you?" The man's tone was very calm. Jean Wan didn't speak. She knew the condition of the wound on her head. Although it wasn't serious and she had been given a tetanus shot before she woke up, to avoid infection, it was indeed for her own good that she didn't go out and see the wind before she completely healed. She quickly ended the topic of hiding her cell phone and pointed at the door. Shall we let them in first? Mo Jingshan glanced at her again. Jin Wan shifted her eyes away, refusing to look at him. However, based on his attitude toward Yen Gu, if she was really brought away by him, it was likely that Yen Gu would not have a good ending. Yesterday, she had already caused Qin's sighting to be locked at the door. Today, she had to be more restrained in her words and actions to avoid harming others. There was no need for her to speak. Based on the man's understanding of her, he could tell that she was weighing the pros and cons and decided to keep her mouth shut. Only then did he open the door. Jin Wan rushed to open the door. When she opened the door, she saw that Yen Gu and the police officer were still standing by the door. Seeing that the door was open, the two of them turned to Jin Wan in unison. Come in. Jin Wan opened the door. The two of them looked at the door again before walking in. When he entered, Yen Gu saw that Jin Wan's complexion was much better. He recalled the day when Mo Jingshan brought her out of the sea. At that time, she was covered in seawater, and there were bloodstains on her head and body. Her complexion was unbelievably pale. He couldn't help but say apologetically, Sister Nguyen, I'm really sorry. That day, when you were kidnapped by the kidnappers, the police and I were busy chasing after other people. We didn't expect that you would be trapped. Jin Wan raised her eyebrows and smiled disapprovingly. Since you're trying to protect more innocent citizens, won't argue with you. Aren't you going to take a statement? Let's begin. The police officer who came with Yen Gu took out a notebook and a recording pen. Jin Wan politely invited them to sit down. However, the two of them glanced at the surroundings and then at Mo Jingshan, who, although allowed them to enter, maintained a cold and indifferent expression. Neither of them dared to sit down and only stood in the middle of the living room, planning to quickly take their statements and end this quickly. The two of them asked Jin Wan a few questions. After receiving Jin Wan's cooperative answers, they turned to Mo Jingshan and asked him a few more questions. Although Mo Jingshan's tone was indifferent and impatient, at the very least, he was cooperative. Although his answers were short, Yen Gu and the police officer who came with him heaved a long sigh of relief. No matter what, their task of asking them to take a statement was about to be completed. After asking all the questions, Yen Gu asked about Jin Wan's injuries that day. The other police officer put away the notebook and then turned to Mo Jingshan with a serious expression. Mr. Mo, your car was salvaged that day. However, the body of the car was badly damaged, and the car was seriously flooded. It has already been treated as a scrapped car. However, at that time, you and Miss G were innocently kidnapped. It's really fortunate that you were able to escape in the end. Our police have specially held a meeting to discuss this matter. Regarding your ghost, after we calculate the appropriate compensation price, we will discuss the specific matters with you. However, because your car is really too expensive, the calculation time and the time we have agreed on may have to wait, Mo Jingshan lightly and indifferently responded. By the side, Jin Wan heard these words. Although the car was not hers, she still instinctively felt her heart ache. Mo Jingshan's ghost was a World Limited Edition commemorative car. Even if the police wanted to compensate for it, if they were to ask for 1/6 of the original price, it would most likely cost more than 10 million yuan. The police would indeed need to discuss this price carefully. They definitely could not fork out so much money in such a short time. Fortunately, the moment Mo Jingshan drove the car into the sea, he had already prepared for the car to be scrapped. He did not intend to haggle with the police over the compensation rights and amount. If he really wanted to haggle over it, the police in High City and some of the directors would most likely cry and bleed. When Yen Gu and the others were preparing to leave, Jin Wan was about to stand up to send them off when she suddenly received Mo Jingshan's gaze. Did he really want her to resign from Yen Ji's bodyguard job right now? There were other people by Yen Ji's side. If she were to directly resign from his part-time job, it would be too disrespectful. Furthermore, although Yen Gu was only a year younger than Jin Wan, he had always taken care of her. Perhaps because he had spent many years in the police academy, he was a very upright and charismatic person. More importantly, he treated Jin-won very well and was very responsible. She took the opportunity to send them out to chat with Yen-gu and the other police officer with a smile. She did not mention a single word about firing Yen-gu. In any case, she had no intention of quitting. Just as the two were about to leave, the man's cold and low voice abruptly rang. If you want to be a special police officer, then go back and do your job properly. It's best if you practice in a police station or another police department. A job like being a bodyguard doesn't suit you. It won't be of any help to your career as a special police officer. Jin-won, Yen Ji's footsteps faltered. He abruptly turned to look in Mo Jingshan's direction. Before he could speak, Jin-won had already quickly grabbed his arm and led him out the door. Seeing Jin-won tugging Yen Ji's arm out, Mo Jingshan's expression darkened. When they reached the door, Jin-won raised her hand and gestured for Yen-gu to keep quiet. Go back first. I'll tell you when I return to the company. Chapter 530. No, things haven't reached that stage yet. Jin-won consoled him. That's right. You've been fired. The man's calm and clear voice rang by the door. Jin-won abruptly turned to glare at the persistent Mo Jingshan. The man had one hand in his pocket and did not give Yen-gu any chance. His expression was indifferent, but his voice was as clear as his features. What are you talking about? The police officer beside Yen-gu asked curiously. Yen Ji's expression immediately darkened. He was about to flare up when Jin-won rushed to tug on his wrist, using her gaze to indicate for him to leave first. Yen-gu was clearly unconvinced. For someone like him who had grown up in the police academy and the special forces, even though he knew Mo Jingshan was above him, his unwillingness to submit was still evident. Jin-won glared at him in warning and poked his arm. Yen-gu suppressed his anger and glanced at Jin-won with a heavy expression. Jin-won gave him several glances. Yen-gu endured it and stiffly turned to enter the elevator with the policeman. Only when the elevator brought the two down did Jin-won turn around. She raised her eyes to meet the man's gaze. This brat has only been your bodyguard for less than a month. His feelings for you are already so deep that he needs to exchange glances with you for half a day before he's willing to leave? The man looked at her, his voice was mild and displeased. Wasn't it too obvious that the vinegar jar was overturned? Jin-won composed herself. Her red lips curved into a smile as she tilted her head to look at him. She spoke with some pride. This is probably the charm of a person. In the past, when Feng Ling was by my side, weren't there many people who said that she was cold, unwilling to get close to others, and never made friends? But not long after, didn't our relationship become very good? Mo Jingshan's elegant brows moved slightly. She was speaking the truth. Jin-won's personality was not particularly flamboyant, nor was she particularly reserved. She was not deliberate at all, but she had a unique charm that made people instinctively like to get close to her. Jin-won gave people a comfortable feeling. This was Feng Ling's evaluation of her. In the afternoon, the doctor came to check the wound on her head and confirmed that after days of careful care, the surface of the small bruise on the top of her head had healed a lot. From tonight on, even if she washed her hair with water, there would be no problem as long as she washed it gently. Hearing this, Jin-won immediately felt that her head was no longer itchy and uncomfortable. These days, she had to wear a waterproof head cover when she showered every day and could only wash the lower half of her hair. As for the top of her head and the injured scalp, they had not been soaked in water for several days. No matter how clean it was, she was still not used to it and was especially itchy. When the doctor left, Jin-won didn't need to stay up until night. She rushed into the bedroom and then the bathroom. Finally, after washing her hair from the roots to the ends, she came out looking refreshed. She picked up the bag of lingerie that Mo Jingshan had bought for her, opened it, and her expression immediately darkened. Last night, she was still wondering how a man like Mo Jingshan, with his status, managed to buy her underwear. Who would have thought? What's wrong? The bedroom door was suddenly opened. Seeing Jin Wan's dark face, Mo Jingshan asked. Jin Wan held a set of underwear in her hand and squinted at Mo Jingshan. What kind of taste do you have? When have I ever worn underwear of this color and this type? Mo Jingshan looked at the two things in her hand. Not only were they bright red, but they were actually of a pathetically small style of sexy underwear, and they were very interesting. She basically couldn't wear them inside in daily life. Even if she wore them, she wouldn't be wearing them at all. Mo Jingshan, this underwear was definitely not of low quality. After all, Mo Jingshan had bought it in a commercial street near the company. The brands that could be opened in the nearby commercial street were either luxurious or expensive. Mo Jingshan didn't have many opportunities to buy things in person, and in the past 3 years, he had even fewer opportunities. He remembered Jin Wan's habit after showering every day and knew that there was only a set of underwear in the clothes that Auntie Chen bought for her. To prevent her from making excuses to leave, he left the company after the meeting, casually strolled along the commercial street and stopped in front of a lingerie store. He really hadn't studied women's underwear much. He only told them Jin Wan's size and asked the shop assistant to pick 2 suitable pieces to wrap and bring them to him. However, he didn't expect that when those young female shop assistants saw a man wearing a suit and tie and exuding the aura of a superior running out to buy women's underwear, they completely misunderstood him. They thought that he was trying to have some fun, so they specially chose 2 sets of this type. Mo Jingshan glanced at the 2 pieces of fabric in her hand. I only told the shop assistant the size. I didn't expect that they would bring out this type. When it came to sizes, no one knew her underwear better than Mo Jingshan. Jin Wan's face burned suspiciously. Seeing that the man was still calm and didn't have the slightest bit of guilt, it seemed that he really didn't deliberately buy it. However, she couldn't help complaining. What kind of mentality do shop assistants have these days? Don't tell me they think that you're keeping a third-rate little star as a mistress and are trying to do something sexy for you? Mo Jingshan smiled. He also didn't expect that these young ladies who worked as shop assistants would let their imaginations run wild. However, although the color of this underwear was a little gaudy, based on Jin Wan's figure and appearance, she would be able to handle it. Mo Jingshan couldn't help but imagine the scene of Jin Wan wearing this set of underwear. His lower body could already faintly feel the blood rushing down. Later, I'll have Auntie Chen buy 2 more sets for you. Then what should I wear now? The man was quiet for a few seconds. Why don't you feel wronged? Wear this first. Jin Wan, only if I'm crazy would I wear this kind of damn thing to walk around in front of you. Mo Jingshan's eyes were smiling as he curved his lips. I don't mind if you walk around in front of me without any clothes on. Auntie Chen, who had just returned from tidying up the study, heard these words and was instantly dumbfounded. She then quickly entered the study to continue tidying up, trying her best to act as though she was invisible. Jin Wan was annoyed. Right now, the sky is still bright. I'll go buy it myself. The man glanced at her. How are you going? Jin Wan furrowed her brows. The doctor said that the surface of the wound on my head has already healed. I can touch water and go out to see the wind. There shouldn't be any problems. I'm not used to having others buy this kind of thing for me. I'll go buy it myself. Speaking up to here, she paused. She recalled that after showering, she had already washed the set. Right now, if she were to use a hairdryer to dry it, it would take at least half an hour. She couldn't just go out without wearing anything inside. The man could easily see through her thoughts from her expression. He smiled ambiguously, clearly patiently waiting for her to put on this set before going out. Chapter 531. Putting it on was as good as not wearing it, but she couldn't just go out like this. After hesitating for a long time, Jin Wan suddenly threw the 2 pathetically small pieces of fabric into the trash can with a look of disgust. The man's smiling expression immediately sank. Jin Wan turned back to the bedroom with a proud expression, went to the bathroom to take out the previous set, turned the hairdryer to the highest speed, and spent 15 minutes to dry it. Then she quickly put it on and came out clean. Mo Jingshan's well-defined fingers gently tapped the back of the sofa. Looking at Jin Wan, who had already put on everything and came out, his elegant and deep brows moved slightly, and he said casually, "You can't wear the other set either?" Jin Wan said unhappily, "The other set is black, and the style and fabric are no different from this one." Anyway, she would never wear it. But she knew that this brand was very expensive. The red set had already been opened and taken out. As for the black set, she should ask Auntie Chen to find a chance to return it and exchange it for some money. After all, it was worth several thousand yuan, enough for Auntie Chen to pay for half a year's tuition for her youngest son. There was no need to throw it away. It's raining tonight, and there are still 3 hours before evening. Are you sure you want to buy it yourself in such a short time? The man's tone was extremely indifferent. Although the wound is fine, I can't go too far. I can only stroll in the nearby commercial streets. All right. There is a department store nearby, and there are several commercial streets nearby. It's enough for me to stroll around. She could finally come out to breathe a breath of fresh and free air. As soon as she came out, Jin Wan felt that she didn't want to go back. In the department store near Aolan International, Jin Wan not only bought 2 sets of underwear for herself, but also bought a variety of other clothes and necessities. After all, she hadn't gone shopping for some time. If it weren't for this place, she would have been so busy that she wouldn't have the time to go shopping. Rather than saying that Auntie Chen followed her and helped her carry things, it was more like Mo Jingshan sent Auntie Chen to follow her to prevent her from running around. Mo Jingshan did not go to the company today. Earlier, Shenmu had brought some things for him to sign, so Mo Jingshan did not come in. He had Auntie Chen accompany Jin Wan to buy them. There were many situations in which a woman bought clothes. Some people shopped all day but didn't buy much, but Jin Wan was different. It didn't take her 3 hours at all. She only spent an hour to buy a lot of clothes. She bought whatever she saw that caught her eye. She came out to buy things, not to shop at all. In the past few years, she had been like this even when she was out shopping. She didn't have the time to pick and choose. Her skin and figure weren't very picky about clothes. Any style on her was more beautiful than a model's drawing, so she just took whatever she liked. She didn't have the leisure to compare or try it on. "Wrap this up for me, thank you. Although it's the end of summer and it's still very hot, it's going to be autumn soon. Is this trench coat this year's new style? Not bad, wrap this up too. The material is very soft. It should be very comfortable to sleep in. Wrap it up. Does that pair of shoes have high heels? Oh, these sunglasses are good." After shopping, Jin Wan carried 2 bags in each hand, and Auntie Chen followed behind with a few bags. Jin Wan didn't want her to help, but she insisted. Knowing that Auntie Chen was sent by Mo Jingshan, she was more or less unhappy that Auntie Chen was on Mo Jingshan's side, so she let her carry. Anyway, although there were a lot of things, they were not very heavy. At the cashier, Jin Wan habitually wanted to take her card, but her hands suddenly paused in the air. Only then did she remember that she had no money now. When she went out, she was in such a hurry that she even forgot to take the dozen notes and cell phone under the pillow, not to mention that it was not enough even if she took it. The staff at the cashier had taken the payment forms for the things she bought and set a number. Jin Wan didn't deliberately buy anything too expensive, but in this shopping mall, any piece of clothing would not be cheap. The total value of these things added up to more than 6 figures. "Mrs. Mo, you didn't bring money?" Seeing Jin Wan's expression was a little embarrassed, Auntie Chen stood by and asked in a low voice. Jin Wan pursed her lips. For a moment, she wanted to ask Auntie Chen to pay for it and return it to her later, but Auntie Chen's family was ordinary, and there were many poor relatives who borrowed money from her. Her youngest son was in high city and needed money to go to college. How could she have so much money in her card? Jin Wan didn't ask. What if she didn't buy it? She was hesitating awkwardly whether to send the clothes back to the various brand stores when a slender and well-defined finger suddenly appeared in front of her, handing over a black bank card. Jean Wan turned to see Mo Jingshan's calm face, and her embarrassment immediately disappeared. She subconsciously muttered, "It feels so bad to have no money, no card, and no cell phone." Mo Jingshan looked down at her and smiled casually. "Don't you still have me?" With that, before Jean Wan could speak, the man put a white outdoor cap on her head. Jean Wan raised her eyes only to find that most of the light was blocked by the brim of the cap. She could only look up at the man who was much taller than her, and her eyes were full of obvious questions. "Why are you here? If you want to go out these days, try to wear a cap. Although the skin on the surface of the wound has healed, it's better not to be exposed to the wind." The man looked at her wearing a hat and raised her head like a primary school student. His lips curved into a gentle arc. He paid for the cap, took the 2 bags of things from Jean Wan's hand, and took those from Auntie Chen's hand. Seeing that Mr. Mo was so patient and indulgent to Jean Wan, Auntie Chen smiled sincerely. In the past, she rarely went out with them in the Yew Garden, so she didn't know their relationship and development. In the past, Grandfather Mo asked her to keep an eye on them and report to him whether their married life was harmonious or not. That feeling was different from now. After these 2 days in Aolan International, she felt that Mr. Mo really treated Jean Wan differently from others, and now she felt that both Jean Wan and Mr. Mo were rare beauties in the world. Walking side by side like this, people would turn their heads to look at them. Moreover, CEO Mo was usually such a noble and indifferent person. He would personally buy Jean Wan underwear and take the time to go shopping with her. Even though Jean Wan had never been nice to him, he still doted on her as if everything was so natural and right. Chapter 532. To Auntie Chen's surprise, after she went to the supermarket to buy various ingredients in the afternoon, Mo Jingshan asked her to leave. Auntie Chen asked what about dinner. Mo Jingshan said he would cook. So when Auntie Chen left, she still looked incredulous. When she was in the Yew Garden, she had never seen Mr. Mo enter the kitchen, but when she saw Mr. Mo washing vegetables just now, she felt that he seemed to be very good at cooking here. She really didn't expect that Mo Jingshan, who was usually the most noble, cold, and indifferent person in everyone's eyes, would actually cook dinner for Jean Wan. But Jean Wan, at this moment, Jean Wan was holding an iPad that she bought in the mall today in her bedroom. iPads were no longer uncommon in the future, but this year, they had just become popular. She lay on the bed and watched movies on the iPad, acting as if nothing had anything to do with her. All she did was eat and sleep, like an ingrate. However, Mr. Mo completely indulged this ingrate and let her be happy. Auntie Chen silently looked at Jean Wan lying on the bed and remembered that in the months after she and Mr. Mo returned from the United States 3 years ago, Mr. Mo didn't come home every day, but Jean Wan stayed at home every day, waiting for him to come back. She remembered that once, because she thought Mr. Mo would definitely return to the Yew Garden that day, Jean Wan specially cooked a table of delicious food for Mr. Mo, but that night, Mr. Mo still didn't come back and didn't even answer Jean Wan's phone call. Later, the food was cold and couldn't be eaten. Jean Wan sat at the table alone and ate the cold food silently. At that time, Auntie Chen didn't even dare to say a word to persuade her. She just felt sorry for her. Thinking of this, the thought of feeling indignant for Mr. Mo suddenly disappeared. Instead, she smiled. In fact, it was quite refreshing to see Mr. Mo, such a cold and arrogant person, compromise little by little for Jean Wan. Even after Auntie Chen left, Jean Wan was still watching the iPad on the bed. The room was very quiet, and only the sound of the movie could be heard. At this time, she was watching a very ordinary movie that had just been released, but in recent years, there weren't too many good movies in China. They were all made by some veteran directors and some were not funny. She was too lazy to find Hollywood movies, so she casually opened it and watched it for a while. His acting was a mess and he wasn't paying attention at all. It had been a while since Auntie Chen left. Jean Wan finally turned off the iPad, threw it aside, got up, and walked out. Hearing the sound of the kitchen, she thought for a moment and went in. The man in a shirt and trousers was standing by the cupboard. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, revealing his muscular forearms. She leaned against the kitchen door and watched the man wash or cut the vegetables while preparing dinner. Her eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of mist. In these 3 years, she had never thought that such a day would come. "Why don't you continue to watch your movie?" The man was cutting vegetables and didn't look back, but it was obvious that he was talking to her. Jean Wan was still leaning against the kitchen door. Earlier, before Auntie Chen left, she hid outside the bedroom door and stared at me for a long time. She must have felt that it was too much for me to let Boss Missouri cook dinner without even helping. Mo Jingshan's hands did not stop moving. "Watch your movie in peace. I'll call you when dinner is ready." Jean Wan thought of the extremely boring movie just now. It was better to stand here and watch Mo Jingshan cut vegetables than to watch that kind of movie. Noticing that she did not leave, Mo Jingshan turned on the tap to wash his hands and slowly wiped them. "Do you really want to help?" Jean Wan did not speak. She was just saying that. After being locked up here for several days, the resentment in her heart had not dissipated. Standing in the same apartment with him was already very irritating. She did not really intend to go into the kitchen. After all, no matter how big the kitchen was, it was still a relatively small space. She would certainly not take the initiative to go in. But Auntie Chen had bought too many ingredients. She had probably planned to make a good meal tonight, but Mo Jingshan had taken over. If she really did not help, who knew when she would be able to eat? Her gaze swept over the pile of ingredients on the cupboard and she walked over. Jean Wan was about to say that she would not do anything else but bring the oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and cooking wine over and help him make some seasonings, such as sweet, sour, salt, and a small amount of soy sauce for the sweet and sour fish, and various seasonings for the mushroom soup, and she had just walked over and was about an arm's length away when her wrist was suddenly caught by the man. Before Jean Wan had time to speak, she was dragged by him and stumbled in his direction. When she hurriedly tried to steady herself, the man had already kissed her. Jean Wan was stunned for a moment. When she came to her senses, she hurriedly stepped back and pushed his shoulder hard, but the man held her waist and brought her back. In just 2 steps, he directly pressed her against the counter of the cupboard. Ugh! Jean Wan instantly widened her eyes and tried to step back with both hands and feet, but the man still firmly held her. It was not a fierce and hot kiss, but their lips were pressed together, gentle and intoxicating. But because she subconsciously struggled a few times, the man who was originally very gentle simply pried open her lips and teeth, invaded her, and entangled with her. It was like an ambiguous, gentle, and forceful invasion, and Jean Wan struggled to push him away and hugged him. It was not until Jean Wan bit him hard that the man's movements paused. He lowered his eyes to look at her cheeks flushed and panting from the kiss. "I'll cook." "What are you doing?" Before she finished speaking, a short, low cry followed, and Jean Wan's body was suddenly picked up by him. It was not the kind of hug that wrapped around the waist, nor was it a hug. Instead, he held her armpits like holding a child and lifted her off the ground. In an instant, she had changed from leaning against him to sitting on the counter of the cupboard. She was still in shock and widened her eyes, staring at the man in front of her in disbelief. "What are you doing? Ugh." Her lips were kissed again. The man was tall and had long legs. He was completely unaffected by her sitting so high. This time, Jean Wan didn't have to be held up by him. She raised her head and was kissed by the man at eye level. She sat on the cupboard. Not far from her was the stove that had not been turned on, and not far from her was the refrigerator. There were some bowls, chopsticks, and plates behind her. She did not dare to move, but her stiff posture allowed the man to linger in her mouth for a moment as though he had succeeded. Chapter 533. He stroked her cheek with his palm and curled his lips. "Don't you want to help me? Sit here and let me kiss you for a while, en?" Jean Wan stared at him in shock. What kind of help was this? Being stared at by the man at such a close distance, her heart was thrown into disarray. She rushed to push him away. "This is the kitchen, and the cabinet is also." Before she could finish her words, her lips were kissed again. Mo Jingshan's hand moved from her cheek to her shoulder, and then to her back. Jinwan trembled all over, but he did not let go of her. He unhurriedly kissed her from her lips to her earlobe. "Obediently stay here and let me kiss you. That's the biggest help." Jinwan's eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of water from the kiss. She finally focused her gaze on a certain point on the kitchen wall. The man's hand had already reached over. She immediately shivered and cried out in anger, "Mo Jingshan." Jinwan. She abruptly slapped the man's hand away from her waist and then pushed him harshly. This man was really shameless to the extreme. Jinwan felt that she had never seen him so shameless in her 2 lives. How could he have the cheek to act like a gangster toward his ex-wife? However, before she could scold him in anger, the man's kiss landed once more. It was gentle and suppressive, and the kiss was heavy. It was not until a strange and awkward sound came from Jinwan's stomach that the man finally stopped kissing her. The darkness in the man's eyes had not disappeared. It was clear that he did not want to stop with a simple kiss. However, Jinwan's stomach was too hungry, and it had already begun to protest. Jinwan was angry and embarrassed. She rushed to get down from the cabinet when he let go of her, but her feet were still some distance from the ground. She was trying to figure out which direction to jump in when the man's arms circled around her waist. He carried her down and placed her on the ground. This time, he quickly let go. Just as Jinwan was about to fly into a rage, his brows moved slightly. "If you want to eat early, go back to the bedroom to watch your movie. If you stand here, you'll only affect my progress of making dinner. In the end, I'll eat you. It's not impossible. After all, I've been hungry for so long, en?" Jinwan, she felt that the little bit of gratitude she had for him was about to be used up. Staying here for a few days was a huge loss for her. An hour later, the boring movie on Jinwan's iPad was finally over. Jinwan turned over in bed and opened her sleepy eyes, which were so bored that she almost fell asleep. If it weren't for the fragrance of food, she would have fallen asleep. When Mo Jingshan brought the dinner to the table one by one, Jinwan had already got up and sat down at the table. Not to mention washing the dishes, she didn't even want to help him carry the dishes or hold the utensils. Therefore, her so-called help in front of the kitchen was basically the same as wanting to cause trouble. When Mo Jingshan handed over the bowl and chopsticks, Jinwan picked up the chopsticks and began to eat without saying a word. The man lowered his eyes and narrowed his eyes as he watched her focus on each dish while eating. She was satisfied with every bite. He curled his lips and smiled in satisfaction. If it weren't for the old affection she had for the food he made, it would have been very difficult for him to keep her here to recuperate. However, Jinwan's injury was no longer a problem, and it wasn't appropriate for her to stay in the company. MN Group was the empire she had built with her strong will and passion in the past 3 years. Even though Mo Jingshan now regretted leaving her so far away and letting her wings grow so hard that even though he had never really let her go, he still tried to pull her back with the thread in his hand, but it wasn't easy to pull her back. Mo Jingshan didn't ask her when she would leave, nor did Jinwan. From the food she ate, he could tell that she had a good appetite. After dinner, Jinwan no longer hid her cell phone. She nestled on the sofa and texted Xia Tian. Xia Tian sent several photos of the baby sleeping with a pacifier in his mouth, which almost melted Jinwan's heart. She held the cell phone and couldn't help kissing it, but when she saw Mo Jingshan coming over, she turned off the cell phone screen and didn't show it to him. Mo Jingshan watched as she pouted and smiled at the phone, but when he approached, she immediately put it down. At the same time, her expression turned fierce. His brows rose slightly. The difference in treatment was too great. When he put Jinwan on the table to kiss her, Mo Jingshan clearly felt that if he touched her like this again, he might not be able to control himself. At night, Jinwan went back to the bedroom to sleep. This time, he didn't insist on sleeping in the bedroom but slept on the sofa in the living room. The night was peaceful and harmonious. When Jean-Wan woke up in the middle of the night, she seemed to vaguely hear the sound of a shower coming from the spare bathroom outside. Why was he taking a shower so late? Jean-Wan thought she had heard wrong, turned over, and continued to sleep. The next morning, when Jean-Wan got up, it was past 8 o'clock. Auntie Chen hadn't come yet, so Mo Jingshan went to the company. She was alone in the apartment of AO Lawn International. Jean-Wan got up, stretched, and then went out to observe the situation outside. Seeing that there was no one else, she quickly turned to pack up her clothes, cell phone, and other things. After packing everything up, she carried the bag she bought at the department store yesterday and rushed to the door, planning to leave. However, when she was changing her shoes in front of the door, she felt something on the door. She looked up and saw a white note stuck on it. It was a note written by Mo Jingshan, written with a strong pen. There is toast in the kitchen oven. Leave after breakfast. Jean-Wan stared at the note for a long time, and her face darkened. She abruptly tore the note down. She could have texted or called him, but he had to stick it here. Was he deliberately making things difficult for her? Shine Group, not far from AO Lawn International. Outside the president's office, Mo Jingshan had just walked out when his cell phone suddenly rang. He picked up the phone and heard the person on the other end saying, "CEO Mo, Miss G has just left. She took a taxi and left. It seems that she is going back to the west side of the city. Many of her documents haven't been completed yet. I guess she is going back to Yuehu Bay first." After saying this, the bodyguard waited nervously for Mo Jingshan's reply, ready to take orders to intercept her and bring her back. However, there was a moment of silence on the phone, and then the man's voice rang. "All right, I got it. Dash." Chapter 534. The bodyguard was surprised. "This. Mr. Mo, aren't you going to get her back?" Outside the CEO's office, the man in black stared at the changing numbers in front of the elevator in the distance, one hand in his trouser pocket, the other holding a cell phone, his handsome face as calm as water, and his tone indifferent. "Wherever she wants to go, just watch her go back. Don't let her run around on the way. Watch her go back to the company or Yuehu Bay." The bodyguard on the other end of the phone answered, "Okay, Mr. Mo, try to follow her without her noticing and keep her safe." "Got it. The security facilities in Yuehu Bay are quite good. If she goes home, let her go back to have a good rest. Don't disturb her." "Okay." After a pause, the bodyguard suddenly said, Miss G got out of the car halfway. She went to a roadside breakfast shop to buy some breakfast, took it to the car, and continued to Xiqing district. "Okay." Sure enough, she didn't take a bite of the toast left for her. Jean-Wan sat in the taxi, nibbling on a vegetarian bun and looking at her cell phone. When she arrived at Yuehu Bay, she paid the fare, quickly got out of the taxi, and walked in. Although she didn't have any ID cards with her, fortunately, she could enter all the entrances with her fingerprint and password, so she went home as quickly as possible. She hadn't been back for several days. Her home in Yuehu Bay was quiet and empty. After all, she had just moved in, and all the furniture was new. She was the only one in the large apartment. These days, when she was in AO Lawn International, she wished she could grow wings and fly back, but now she was finally back. When she entered the door, she didn't feel anything different, but after resting on the sofa for a while, she suddenly felt that she was almost drowned by the silence and emptiness. Jean-Wan got up, opened the window, walked to the balcony, and looked downstairs. The beautiful scenery of Yuehu Bay was in front of her. This was the 15th floor, neither too high nor too low, and there were all kinds of people downstairs. But when she came back just now, she noticed that the upper 5 floors hadn't been sold yet. Maybe the mysterious owner sold the house so smoothly that he offered a high price? Otherwise, why had the top floor and her floor been sold, but the lower floors hadn't been sold yet? She remembered that the furniture on the top floor had been moved out last time, but she didn't know when the new residents would move in. There weren't any neighbors that were too close to each other, making the house seem even quieter. She called the company and said that she would go over in the afternoon. She needed to take a shower at home, change her clothes, and relax. For the whole morning, she was bored to death. She found a book on the bookshelf and went back to the living room to read. Then she called the vegetable and fruit supermarket downstairs and asked them to send her some fresh fruits and ingredients. She planned to cook lunch for herself and go to the company after she was full. But when she arrived at the company in the afternoon, she did not expect to meet an unexpected guest. Seeing Jean Wan coming, Xiao Ba came up to her and whispered, "Boss, she has been sitting there waiting for a long time." We tried to persuade her, but she didn't listen. She refused to leave. Jean Wan glanced at Ji Mengran, who was seated in the lounge on the first floor. Jean Wan waved at Xiao Ba, indicating that she should go do what she was busy with. A moment later, she turned to look at the people in the lounge on the first floor and walked over. The sun was shining brightly outside, and the lounge was illuminated by the sunlight. The temperature was moderate because of the air conditioner, and with the sunlight shining in, it was warm. Even the air was extremely comfortable. This was how Ji Mengran felt sitting here. Being in Jean Wan's territory, Ji Mengran was not too arrogant this time. When Jean Wan walked over, she raised her eyes to look at her and suddenly smiled at her. "Sister." This smile and the way she addressed her indicated that she came with a purpose. Jean Wan glanced at the time and looked at her indifferently. "What's the matter?" Ji Mengran smiled at her and said, "Aren't I also in the real estate industry now? Our studio is developing well and has become more and more popular in the past 2 months. If you see the performance of our studio in the past 2 months, you must be very surprised, especially in the area occupied, resources and purchase rate." Ji Mengran smiled at her. Ji Mengran spoke slowly. "Especially this month, as far as I know, among all the companies related to real estate in High City, only our studio exceeded the quota at the beginning of the month and has been far ahead of others." Jean Wan looked at her calmly, wondering what she was up to. Although MN Group started as a real estate studio, the company's industry chain now covered not only real estate but also the most profitable industries in recent years. In addition, in the past 3 years, the domestic housing price had been rising at a frightening speed, so this year had come to a buffer period. Therefore, MN Group's primary goal this year was not real estate but other ways of making profits. However, she did not expect that Ji Mengran would one day come here to demonstrate or provoke hatred. Jean Wan sighed in her heart. Now, no matter how much land Ji Mengran's studio bought, it was almost impossible to sell it at a higher price than the original price. It was difficult to maintain the original price. The government had always had a relative regulation policy, and this was the first time in the past 3 years that it had been implemented with great force. Ji Mengran happened to be stuck in this unlucky muzzle, but she did not know it. Ji Mengran smiled. "It's all thanks to Brother Sheng and the big shots of various real estate companies in High City that our studio can develop steadily. In the following days, we will continue to work hard. Sister, when are you going to give me the fat piece of meat under your company's name? After all, I don't think you plan to continue working on that project this year, do you?" She was referring to a piece of public land acquired by MN Group a few months ago. It covered a large area, but Jean Wan knew that the land could not make a corresponding return this year. In a year and a half, the advantage of the land would disappear, and the price would not rise much. Although it would not make a loss, it would not make a profit, so Jean Wan stopped the project and put it aside for the future. She did not expect that Ji Mengran would take a fancy to that land and say it was a fat piece of meat. Did she want to snatch it from her? TSK, it seemed that Ji Mengran was keeping a close eye on her company. Jean Wan's achievements in MN Group were a thorn in her side. Everything was done so perfectly that Ji Mengran was so anxious that she wanted to come over and ask to buy that piece of land. Chapter 535. Ji Mengran raised her hand and made a 2 gesture. 200 million yuan. This price was higher than Jin Wan's initial estimation. The piece of land that she had always thought would be ruined had now become a fat piece of meat in Ji Mengran's eyes. It seemed like Jin Wan's remaining prediction ability could only be used to scam this so-called little sister of hers. Jin Wan coldly curved her lips but did not immediately agree. She only said, "You should know that the price of all the land acquired by MN Group will increase by several folds. However, recently, our company really hasn't been able to devote too much attention to real estate. Regardless of our current relationship, considering that we grew up together, it's not impossible for me to give it to you. Add another 50 million yuan, and the land will be yours. Otherwise, there's no need to talk." Ji Mengran immediately became unhappy. "The moment you opened your mouth, you raised the price by 25%. You even said it was because we grew up together? Are you sure you're not scamming me? If you think I'm scamming you, just stand up and leave. No one will stop you. You have to understand that you were the one who specially came to ask for this piece of land. You were the one who came to talk to me. I'm already giving you some face on account of Dad by not chasing you out. Don't tell me you expect me to sell it to you at a loss. Have you forgotten how much I hate you? Being willing to sell it to you is already considering our past relationship. What more do you want?" Jin Wan smiled faintly. Ji Mengran's expression was ugly. "In the past 2 months, our studio has purchased a lot of land. All the liquid funds have been paid out. Right now, we can only take out 200 million yuan. You know, Dad hasn't paid much attention to me these past few years. He won't care even if I'm short of money. Can you just forget about this 50 million yuan on account of the Ji family raising you?" Jin Wan smiled indifferently. "Don't you always have your brother Sheng?" Although Sheng Yihan was willing to give her money, he had been appearing and disappearing mysteriously recently. Ji Mengran was also embarrassed to say that it had been half a month since they last met. Ji Mengran thought about it and said, "Oh yes, you were out on a business trip during the Dragon Boat Festival and couldn't make it back. You also didn't go back to the Ji family to celebrate the festival with Dad. If you don't have anything going on, why don't you go back to accompany him? You're still talking about nostalgia? I see that ever since you found out that you're not related to the Ji family by blood, you've always had ulterior motives. You don't even have the slightest awareness of being a member of the Ji family." Ji Mengran knew that Jin Wan was already impatient with her. "I'll consider the matter of 50 million yuan. I'll give you a reply in at most 2 days." After speaking, she stood up to leave. If it weren't for the fact that she felt that the piece of land would be the biggest fat piece of meat, she wouldn't have taken the risk to personally ask for it. However, Jin Wan's attitude was better than she had expected, but who knew what Jin Wan was up to? After all these years, Ji Mengran had learned that although Jin Wan didn't seem to be very aggressive, she was actually very powerful. The longer she sat here, the more she would be at a disadvantage. She didn't say anything. Anyway, she was determined to get that piece of land. Just as she was about to leave, Ji Mengran suddenly paused and turned to look at Jin Wan. "By the way, at the Ling Xiao Group's dinner party, sister, you were really outstanding. I didn't expect you to be Xiao Lui's female companion. In fact, I'm very curious. The Mo family isn't enough. How can you get close to the Xiao family? There are thousands of beautiful women in this world. What makes you so seductive?" Jin Wan thought of what Mr. Xiao and Mr. Xiao said at Mr. Zhao's dinner party, as well as something she had suspected at that time. Of course, she never went to verify it, nor did she have the time to contact the Xiao family. She only glanced at Ji Mengran and smiled coldly. "I'm not just outstanding in other places. In the Ji family, aren't you also the one who lost favor?" Ji Mengran's expression instantly turned ugly. "No matter what, Ji Hongwen is my biological father. We are related by blood. Who do you think you are? Until now, you don't even know where your biological father is, let alone whose blood flows in your body. Really? But in your biological father's eyes, which daughter does he want the most? I don't need to emphasize this point, do I? Jinwan still smiled calmly, her eyes cold. To be honest, there was no need to deliberately provoke her. After all, to a person like Ji Mengran, any effort was not worth it. Ji Mengran's expression stiffened. Today, they were here to discuss that piece of land. She could not throw away this piece of fat meat that Jinwan had promised to sell to her because of a momentary quarrel. Ji Mengran suppressed the unhappiness in her heart and smiled carelessly. Then I'll have to trouble big sister to take into account that you stole my father's love from me when I was young and give me that 50 million yuan. Jinwan coldly evaluated, even family affection can be used as a bargaining chip. You really only care about profit. Ji Mengran sneered. Family affection? Dad clearly intends to hand over the inheritance of the Ji family's business to you, an outsider who shouldn't even have the surname Ji. If I don't take advantage of my youth to pave the way for my future and build a foundation for myself, don't tell me that in the future, I'll have to beg you to use the Ji family's assets to reward me with a mouthful of food? Even if I beg you, will you give it to me? Jinwan raised her eyebrows and smiled. I really won't. Ji Mengran's face darkened. She turned and walked away. Before walking out of the front door of the MN Group, she looked around again. The completely high-end independent office building and the corporate image all impacted her self-esteem. At the thought that Jinwan had done everything better than her, she was even angrier, as if someone was chasing her. She quickly disappeared in front of the office building of the MN Group. When Jinwan returned to the office, Xiaoba knew that Jinwan didn't get along well with that Ji Mengran, so she didn't mention that annoying person again. She just took the backlog of documents that Jinwan hadn't come to the company these days and needed to be reviewed by her personally. Xiaoba leaned against the desk and watched Jinwan flip through the documents and observe her expression. Why do you keep looking at me? Jinwan glanced at her indifferently. Xiaoba chuckled. I'm looking at you, boss, who has been nourished by love for several days. How is it? Are you and CEO Mo really? Jinwan spread the documents in front of her deadpan, looking as if she was going to quickly solve these documents and bury herself in work. She didn't intend to chat about this kind of gossip at all. If you feel that working in High City is too easy and that it's useless to think about these things all day long, I don't mind sending you out. In the future, go on business trips everywhere for me. Don't always stand in front of me and burn your soul of gossip. Xiaoba. She instantly shut up. Chapter 536. At night, Jinwan returned to Yuehu Bay and slept on the big bed alone. She closed her eyes in the dark but couldn't fall asleep. It took her 3 years to adapt to living alone. However, Mo Jingshan used 3 days to break this habit. She had only slept on the floor next to him for 2 nights, but strangely, Jinwan felt as if something was missing. As her thoughts ran wild, Jinwan eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, when he woke up, he felt uncomfortable all over his body. Although he had fallen asleep, he didn't sleep well. When he sat up, he felt that his shoulders and cervical spine were a little sore. It was probably because he had maintained a fixed position to fall asleep. Jinwan went downstairs for a morning jog. Her neighbor, who was jogging and exercising downstairs, greeted her out of habit and asked why she hadn't been seen these 2 days. Jinwan smiled and said that she had been out recently. She ran 2 laps back downstairs and saw the aunt living on the 7th floor chatting with someone. She greeted her out of habit and was about to go upstairs to take a shower and get ready for work. But when the aunt saw her, she suddenly turned around and asked warmly, Miss G, are you out for a morning jog again? By the way, the last few times I met you, you were in a hurry to get ready for work, so I didn't have a chance to talk to you. How old are you this year? Jinwan took a look at the aunt. 24. Oh, you're already 24? I thought you were less than 20. Are you married yet? No. She didn't have anything to say to anyone, let alone a warm neighbor who didn't know much about her. That's good. That's great. My son came back from studying abroad 2 days ago. He's studying for a PhD in finance. He's 28 years old this year. He used to do financial analysis for a large enterprise abroad. His annual salary is not bad. You can see that I live in Uehu Bay. My son's height and appearance are also good. He's definitely a good match for you, Miss G. I'll introduce my son to you. Do you two want to consider a blind date? Jean Wan, blind date? After you moved here, I've been observing you for a long time. You usually go to work, stay at home, or run downstairs in the morning. You are very polite and greet us when you see us. I can see that you are a girl with healthy habits and good quality. My son is coming back, and I haven't found a suitable girlfriend. I wanted to tell you a few days ago, but you haven't been around these days. Today, you finally come. Jean Wan pursed her lips and forced a smile. Auntie, this is too sudden. Besides, a blind date is not suitable for me. If your son is so outstanding, there must be many outstanding girls who are worthy of him. I'd better forget it. Besides, I'm quite busy. My son is also busy, but you young people still have to get married no matter how busy you are. The auntie took her hand and gently patted the back of it to stop her from leaving, and then said, Anyway, aren't you single? We all live here, and we'll see each other all the time in the future. We can gradually cultivate feelings. The first step is to get to know each other. I don't mean anything else. I just want you to get to know each other. Then when your son comes back, let's get to know each other when we meet downstairs. I have to go to work later. I'll go back to take a shower. Jean Wan said and was about to leave. Don't go. Let's exchange phone numbers. My son will return to High City tomorrow. I'll make an appointment with you then. Let's go out for dinner, okay? The auntie was too enthusiastic and kept holding Jean Wan's hand. She often saw this neighbor. Some time ago, this auntie had given Jean Wan the soy milk she made herself in the morning. Jean Wan couldn't refuse her too thoroughly, but she really couldn't do a blind date. In order to get away in time, she left the company's business card with her work number to the auntie and didn't give her her private number. Then she quickly entered the door. Jean Wan thought the auntie was just on a whim, but she didn't expect there would be a follow-up. The next day, Jean Wan had just gotten off work and walked out of the company when she suddenly saw someone waving at her in front of her. She looked up and saw the neighbor auntie waving at her excitedly. Jean Wan walked over. Auntie? What are you? The auntie said with a smile, I know you work here, but I don't know if it's inconvenient for you to answer the phone at work, so I didn't call you directly and just waited here. Come on, get in the car. My son will drive you to dinner. Jean Wan paused and turned to see a blue high-end sports car behind the auntie. At this time, the driver's door opened, and a young man in a casual suit got out of the car and smiled politely at her. Hello. Jean Wan. Hello. Then Jean Wan had to get in the car despite all her excuses, and the auntie held her hand and chatted warmly for a long time in the car. They had booked a delicious French restaurant in advance. It was not on the west side of the city, but in a very prosperous area in the center of High City. After entering the restaurant, the auntie said that she would go out to make a phone call with a knowing look, and then left them staring at each other. Fortunately, the auntie's son was not a young man who had never seen the world. He took the initiative to introduce himself and then told her about his situation. He had just returned to China and hadn't found a job in China yet, so it was not very stable for the time being. If it weren't for his mother forcing him to introduce a girl to him, he probably wouldn't have any plans to go on a blind date or have a girlfriend, but he had a good first impression of Jean Wan and hoped to get to know her first. The auntie's son was very measured in his speech, neither arrogant nor impatient. He didn't talk too much or too little. He was indeed a very good man in all aspects. As a result, Jean Wan chatted with him a little longer. Later, they talked about the changes in the business and financial situation at home and abroad. They got along well, and the expression on her face gradually relaxed and she even smiled. Shine Group. A man stood in front of the window when he suddenly received a photo sent by a bodyguard on his cell phone. He opened it and saw Jean Wan smiling like a flower sitting opposite a man. Mo Jingshan still stood there, and all his eyes fell on the smile on the woman's face until his cell phone rang. He picked it up. The bodyguard on the other end of the phone said, "CEO Mo, Miss G seems to be going on a blind date with a young man tonight." Chapter 537. Before leaving work, Shenmu was preparing to deliver 2 documents to the CEO's office. He knocked on the door and entered, only to see the man standing before him. His posture was ramrod straight, and his aura was extraordinary as usual. Due to his afternoon work, his shirt was buttoned up to the top, and his attire was neat and tidy. In the past 3 years, Mo Jingshan had been working in the company. Shenmu walked in and placed the documents down. However, for some reason, he felt that the temperature of the air conditioner in the office was too low. He turned to look at the numbers on the air conditioner. It was the same as usual and had not been adjusted to a low temperature. "CEO Mo, are you still going to the dinner at the hotel on Hai Tai Street?" Mo Jingshan placed one hand in his pocket. His expression was calm, and his tone was mild. "Yes." It was just one word, but why did it make one feel as though they were in an ice house? It was chilly. Shenmu did not dare to ask further. He left to arrange the time for the dinner with the secretary. After leaving the company, Shenmu silently followed behind Mo Jingshan. The man in front was cold and distant, and his footsteps were steady. His movements were relaxed and steady as he opened the car door and entered the car. After sitting in the car, he casually arranged his expensive and exquisite cufflinks. Everything was the same as usual. However, the atmosphere was strangely cold and solemn, causing Shenmu to not dare to say anything unnecessary. Mo Jingshan sat in the back, his long legs naturally spread apart. He turned his head to look out the window, his gaze cold and indifferent. It carried a hint of unfathomable profoundness. As the car passed by a busy commercial street, it stopped for half a minute near a French restaurant when it encountered a red light. Mo Jingshan's gaze swept toward the transparent glass windows of the French restaurant. In an instant, the car was terrifyingly quiet. The air in the car seemed to have frozen. Shenmu carefully glanced back through the rearview mirror. Noticing the direction Mo Jingshan was looking in, he also turned to look toward the French restaurant. Jean Wan had been sitting in the restaurant chatting with the auntie's son for more than an hour. At first, they were somewhat reserved, but as they chatted about various interesting things in the business world and the financial world in America, they gradually lost track of time and no longer felt awkward. They chatted and laughed. The auntie's son's impression of her gradually increased, and Jean Wan was also full of smiles. Even though it was the first time they met, she did not feel too awkward. However, after chatting for so long, when the waiter brought a plate of fruit salad, Jean Wan glanced at the time and jokingly said, "It's really inappropriate for the auntie to leave with the excuse of answering the phone. She's actually been answering the phone for almost 2 hours." The auntie's son also glanced at the time and smiled. "For the past few years, my mother has been trying to find a girlfriend for me, but I've been abroad studying and working. I really can't find the time. 2 years ago, I did have a girlfriend, but because of our different personalities and different horizons, our relationship fell into an impasse. After we broke up, I didn't even think about it. My mother is half a world away from me, and no matter how long her hands are, she can't reach out to me. In the end, I didn't expect her to make arrangements for me as soon as I returned to China." Speaking up to here, the auntie's son smiled. "But Miss G, you're really outstanding. To be honest, I have a good impression of you. If you also have a good impression of me, the two of us can slowly get to know each other after this meeting. Whether or not there will be any sparks will depend on fate. I won't force it." I can also see that you don't seem to be very interested in this kind of matchmaking. Hearing his words, Jean Wan responded more naturally and generously. That's right. Everything depends on fate. There's nothing wrong with being friends. Feelings can't be forced. The auntie's son looked at her for a while and said, Miss G, do you have someone in your heart? Jean Wan had just picked up a glass of water and didn't move because of his words. She quietly drank the water slowly and then put the glass down. Seeing that she didn't say anything, the auntie's son didn't ask any more. He saw that Jean Wan was full, and the two of them had indeed been chatting here for a long time. During this period, Jean Wan didn't just chat like other girls and was too shy to eat. However, from the moment she sat down, she occasionally drank some water, cut the steak, or ate some fruit. Everything she did was natural, and her every movement was between an elegant mature woman and a fashionable young girl. He said with a smile, My mother should have returned to Yuehu Bay. She said that you also live there now, so it's not too far-fetched for me to send you back, right? I really didn't say no. Just now, my friend sent me a message asking me to go to her place tonight. In a moment, she will send someone to pick me up. I won't go back to Yuehu Bay tonight. I really don't need you to send me back. Jean Wan raised the cell phone she had just received, shook it gently at him, and smiled again. The auntie's son nodded. Okay, then when the person sent by your friend arrives, I'll send you to the car. I'll leave after you leave. Outside the restaurant, Shenmu looked at the scene of the man and woman sitting at the table by the window, talking and laughing, and couldn't help swallowing slowly. Mr. Vince had just left, and now a bodyguard had come. The bodyguard had left. Was this a blind date again? Miss G really had a lot of peach blossoms now, but it wasn't that Jean Wan didn't have peach blossoms in the past, but she always kept a distance from those men, and at that time, when most of them heard that Jean Wan was Imo Jingshan's wife, they would consciously give way and didn't dare to approach her. Now that Miss G was single, no matter how many admirers there were around her, there was nothing wrong with that. Besides, beautiful women were often surrounded by men. She was a woman who was not bound by the constraints of marriage. In addition to her attractive appearance, she also had her career. She stood at the top of everything. It would be strange if no man liked or pursued such a woman. Shenmu withdrew his gaze, looked at the person in the rearview mirror, and braced himself to ask, "CEO-mo, shall we continue to the hotel on Haitai Street? Or, let's stop here first." Mo Jingshan was still silent. After a few seconds, his thin lips opened coldly. Wait. A suffocating atmosphere spread in the car for a moment. Shenmu didn't speak and decisively parked the car in the nearest parking space on the side of the road. In the restaurant, Jean Wan was still talking to the man. Before long, the two of them got up at the same time and walked out of the restaurant. A car was parked on the side of the road, and Jean Wan got into the car alone. As for the man who had been in the restaurant with her just now, he politely said goodbye to her. Recognizing that the car belonged to Xia Tian, the coldness in Imo Jingshan's eyes softened slightly. However, he continued to stare out of the car window. His right hand was placed on the center of the cabinet, his index finger unhurriedly tapping twice. His expression was solemn. Chapter 538. Jean Wan first took the car to Xia Tian's place and played with Xia Tian's little baby. She originally planned to stay at Xia Tian's place that night, but she did not expect that Xia Tian's little policeman would come back. Although there were guest rooms here, the dog food of a family of 3 was much harder to swallow than that of a couple. Jean Wan took a taxi back to Yuehu Bay. Jean Wan's daily life at home and at the company lasted for another week. In the morning, she went for a morning run. In addition to meeting the neighbor auntie, she occasionally met the auntie's son and chatted with him twice during the morning run. On Friday, Jean Wan had just finished running and went home to take a shower. Before she could rest, she suddenly heard her cell phone ringing. She picked up the cell phone and took a look. It was from the company. It was only past 7 o'clock. Why was there a call from the company? CEO G. It was Manager Zhou, the head of the company's planning department. What's up? Why are you calling so early? Manager Zhou's voice was anxious. CEO G, when will you arrive at the company? Are you at home or on the road? I'm about to change clothes and go to the company. What happened? Here's the thing. Last week, our planning department had a new idea about the reconstruction of the stadium, but we only came up with a simple cylindrical simulation map. However, our intern staff got it mixed up and sent the new unconfirmed simulation map to the construction department of the stadium. Today, we saw that the construction department has built the stadium according to our new simulation map, but the actual location can't be connected with the original map of the stadium, which means that this map has caused a huge engineering mistake. Jean Wan's hand, which was about to open the wardrobe to get clothes, paused, and her face became serious. How could you find such a big problem only after a week? We didn't expect that the intern staff would mix up the map and send it to the construction department. At that time, Shine Group gave all the planning to our MN Group, so now the construction department is building according to our map. This map is only a small area, but now it has to be demolished and rebuilt, but the loss is not small. In addition to the loss of at least tens of millions of yuan, it will also affect the foundation that has been built. I don't know what to do. Listening to his tone, Manager Zhou was really worried. He probably didn't sleep all night. After thinking about it, he finally decided to tell her the cause and effect of the matter. He probably didn't go back to the company all night. Jean Wan was silent for a moment. Although the Shine Group was involved in the stadium project, they basically only provided financial and human support, and all other technical and planning tasks were handed over to the MN Group, which was equivalent to the Shine Group handing over this important task to the MN Group. Now that this mess had occurred, the money lost was not important. However, if the foundation that had been laid was affected and the construction had to be restarted, even if the stadium was built in the end, the government would know what had happened in between. MN Group was equivalent to losing face in front of the government. Such a serious engineering and planning mistake was almost unforgivable. I'll be right there. Wait for me at the company. Jean Wan hung up the phone, changed her clothes, and went out. Manager Zhou came in with a pile of documents from the planning department, including those of the interns, and put them on Jean Wan's desk. There was still half an hour to go to work, but the two had been busy in the office for a long time. Jean Wan was still reading the documents, and Manager Zhou helped her and said, CEO G, do you think the interns did it on purpose? The few interns who joined the company this year have very ordinary backgrounds, and their families are also very ordinary. They are all short of money. If they were bribed by a competitor who is targeting our company, it is not impossible for them to deliberately cause trouble for the government on this kind of cooperation project. Jean Wan did think of this, so she asked Manager Zhou to give her the documents of these interns. She didn't respond, just looked at the documents on the desk, pursed her lips and said nothing. Manager Zhou said again, alas, what have we done? The interns made a mistake, but we, the hard-working old employees, have to suffer with them. If we don't handle this well, I'm afraid we'll all be implicated. Jean Wan snorted. Be content. I'm still trying to help you. If I just stand aside and push the blame to the planning department, you'll be scolded by the leaders of the government. Then you won't have the mood to complain anymore. Manager Zhou shrank his neck. CEO G, you're really kind to us, but it doesn't seem realistic if you want to handle this alone. No matter whether it's realistic or not, someone has to stand up, Jean Wan said lightly. It wasn't until the morning that she found out what the problem was. In the afternoon, the government and the construction bureau asked for a meeting to talk about the current progress of the construction. Jean Wan found out the reason. It was true that the interns were bribed by some competitors, but this reason was not enough to explain to the government. If the company couldn't be careful and couldn't even prevent this kind of thing, it could only be regarded as the weak. No one would sympathize with the weak, let alone the strict boundaries between the business and the government. At 3:00 in the afternoon, Jean Wan sat in the car looking at the extra design drawing, thinking about a solution to this matter. Although the meeting today didn't say which mistake in the project was to be dealt with, even if no one had found out about this matter for the time being, if she didn't take the initiative to speak out about this matter and try to reduce the loss as much as possible, this mistake would only be greater in the future. Because this meeting was not only requested by the Construction Bureau but also proposed by the government, this meeting was not held in Shine Group but in the office hall of the government. After arriving, Jean Wan walked into the main hall. Many leaders were already in place, and the others had sat down step by step, leaving only Jean Wan and Mo Jingshan. At present, only the 2 seats closest to the leaders of the city were empty. Jean Wan walked over. Because she had been thinking about that matter, she didn't pay much attention to the name tag on the table and sat down on one side. But when she sat down, almost everyone in the large conference room looked at her in surprise, and Jean Wan realized what was wrong. Chapter 539. Jean Wan glanced at the conference table. Of course, she was sitting in the wrong seat. The nameplate in front was written in gold lettering, Shine Group. On the other hand, the name MN Group was written on the other hand of the city leader. Jean Wan rarely made such a low-level mistake, but because she was a little worried today, she made such a mistake. Although it was not a big problem, it was really shameful. Jean Wan was embarrassed and was about to get up, when a low voice suddenly rang beside her. Sit there. Jean Wan turned her head and saw that it was Mr. Mo, the CEO of Shine Group, who had come to the conference room. She hadn't contacted him since she slipped away from Aolan International, and it was the first time they met after so many days. Jean Wan took a look at him and was about to get up again, but as soon as she left the seat, an irresistible force suddenly came from her shoulder and pulled her back. The man said calmly, "It's the same wherever you sit. CEO rarely takes time to have a meeting. There's no need to make trouble. Just sit down." Jean Wan looked away and said nothing. Mo Jingshan also smiled, moved his hand away from her shoulder, and sat down on the seat on the other side with the name MN Group. Everyone in the room was astonished. What was with CEO Mo's indulgent look and CEO G's cold and arrogant face? However, they had more or less heard that there was something fishy going on between the two of them. Some of the old people in High City's business and political circles knew about the marriage between the G family and the Mo family, but no one dared to say anything. They all kept their mouths shut and watched quietly from the side. Moreover, CEO Mo didn't care whether they sat on the left or right side of the main seat, so of course, they couldn't say anything. Seeing that everyone was already seated, no one said anything. The meeting only talked about the renovation of the stadium. In the second half of the meeting, someone raised doubts about the engineering drawings under construction and asked why there was such an irrelevant building in the middle. Was this the design of the MN Group? Suddenly realizing this question, the conference room fell into silence. Jean Wan was about to get up to explain, but the city leader said that he had to discuss other related projects with CEO Mo of Shine Group and the meeting would be suspended in an hour. Then Mo Jingshan left with the city leaders. But before the meeting continued, Jean Wan was suddenly called out. A young man with blonde hair and blue eyes who spoke fluent Chinese was waiting for her outside. Jean Wan had never seen this person before and found it strange. However, the other party handed her a business card. After seeing this person's name card, she looked at the young man with blonde hair and blue eyes in surprise. Is he Dane? A famous British architect? 3 years ago, he had signed a design contract worth tens of millions with the Shine Group, which made him famous in the world of architecture. He was a top-notch architect that could only be encountered but not sought. Jean Wan didn't know what was going on. At this time, the city leaders asked to see her alone to talk to her about the temporary addition to the stadium. Jean Wan's sense of admiration for the famous designer was instantly frozen. What would come would come. After all, this responsibility still belonged to MN Group, and she couldn't avoid it. After saying goodbye to Dane politely, Jinwan went straight to the lounge where the city leaders were currently. After entering the lounge, she saw several city leaders and the person in charge of the construction bureau were there. She guessed that they didn't criticize her directly in the conference room to save MN Group's face, but now they wanted her to give an explanation. When she came in, Jinwan was still in a trance. She didn't expect that after 3 years of careful ups and downs, and indifferent to any setbacks, she would suffer such a big loss soon after returning to China. The enemy was in the dark, but she was in the light. MN Group had just moved its headquarters back to China, and there were still people who disliked it and wanted to drag MN Group down with them. Just as she took out the plan and design drawings that the intern staff had mistakenly sent to her and was about to give an explanation, the door of the lounge was knocked again, and someone came in. "Sorry to disturb you. I'm Dane, the architect of MN Group. The mistake I made may affect the reputation of CEOG and MN Group, so I came here to have a look." Dane came in, stood directly next to Jinwan, and took the 2 plans and design drawings from her hand. Jinwan was surprised. Dane had never cooperated with her company. It was said that the only Chinese company that had cooperated with Dane was Shine Group. He had never met this designer before. Why did he suddenly appear here to help her solve this problem? Jinwan turned her head and was about to speak when she suddenly saw the cold and tall man coming in from the door of the lounge. Mo Jingshan entered but did not plan to sit down. He ignored the person who was politely leading the way and inviting him to sit. He placed one hand in his trouser pocket and leaned against the door behind him. His handsome face was hidden in the dark corner of the lounge, appearing quiet and unfathomable. The city leaders and the person in charge of the construction bureau present were also stunned. Of course, they had heard of this architect named Dane. He was once the royal designer who had renovated the residence of the British royal family and was very famous internationally. It was said that Dane had signed on to Shine Group 3 years ago. But why did Dane say that the design drawings that MN Group had produced temporarily belonged to him? How could such a low-level design be Dane's work? Dane probably saw Jinwan's confusion and frown because of the problem she had just faced, so he winked at her, asking her to cooperate. Jinwan received Dane's gaze, thought for a while, and turned to look at Mo Jingshan. He was looking at her as if he had been looking at her since he stood there. Deep in his calm eyes was her reflection. Even though she turned to look at him, he didn't move his eyes away. She suddenly remembered what Mo Jingshan had said to her every time she encountered a problem. "Be at ease as Mrs. Mo and leave any problems to me. I'll handle everything. You don't need to be brave." The city leaders had specially called her here to hold her accountable. In short, she would not have a good ending if she came here. So Dane was sent by Mo Jingshan to help her out? Mo Jingshan was still standing there, still looking at her indifferently. All his eyes fell on her. His slender and well-defined fingers casually played with a cup of tea that had just been delivered to him by the person next to him. He gently closed the lid of the white porcelain cup, and his eyes were so calm that it made people feel inexplicably at ease. Chapter 540. For a moment, everyone present could clearly feel that although Mo Jingshan didn't speak, his deep shrewdness and almost playful sneer in his eyes all indicated that Jinwan was his woman, and whoever dared to touch her was tantamount to touching the Tai Sui's head. The city leader didn't dare to take some things too seriously, so he simply looked at Dane and simply asked, "Dane? Didn't you sign a contract with Shine Group? How can the MN Group's plan have anything to do with you?" Dane raised his hand and brushed his golden hair with embarrassment, saying with a smile, "The stadium project is a cooperation between the 2 companies. CEOG and I used to know each other when we were in the UK. Although Shine Group didn't participate in the planning this time, after all, we have a cooperative relationship, so the company sent me and the planning department of MN Group to do it together. This design drawing was not in the original plan, but I was suddenly inspired and suddenly added such a design in the building." Jinwan stood beside Dane and didn't speak. After all, she didn't expect such a change before. She didn't know what Dane would do next, so she just cooperated with him. Is this inspiration? The city leader looked at the very strange design drawing and felt that it couldn't have been made by Dane. Can you please give me the drawing first? Dane turned to look at Jean Wan. Jean Wan silently gave him the drawing. Dane took it and looked at it. Jean Wan was standing closest to him. She could tell from his eyes that it was the first time he had seen this drawing, but it only took him a few seconds. He smiled very calmly. This is indeed the drawing I designed, but it's just a temporary record of inspiration. It hasn't been completed yet. I guess a colleague in the planning department thought I had finished the draft, so he directly sent it to the construction department. Fortunately, I can add my later design to this initial model, so it won't affect the order of any project. With that, Dane turned to look at Jean Wan. CEOG, have you brought a pen? Jean Wan did have the habit of putting a pen in her bag every time she attended a meeting. She took out the pen and handed it to him. Thank you. Dane smiled at her again, took the pen, and casually drew a few lines on the paper with the pen. Jean Wan saw it clearly from the side. Dane had added some ingenious design to the originally ordinary wide cylindrical building. Because this was an extra building in the stadium, there was no need for a too ostentatious design on this occasion, so almost every stroke of the drawing was the finishing touch, making the superfluous building look less superfluous in an instant, and even the arrangement of the use was very clever. Jean Wan just looked at it, and even without listening to Dane's explanation, she had slightly admired it in her heart. No wonder he was the internationally famous Dane, and no wonder he was the designer that Shine Group wanted to sign. There were so many talented people in the world, but there were not many people who could be favored by Mo Jingshan. Now Jean Wan could see how amazing this Dane was. It took Dane less than 5 minutes to finish the drawing, which was neither long nor short. If it weren't for Mo Jingshan's presence, the city leaders probably wouldn't have had the patience to wait, but because of Mo Jingshan's presence, they waited quietly for a while, and no one spoke. Dane turned the drawing over, faced the city leaders, and showed them the new drawing. This is my final design. This cylindrical object is just the base of an international sports picture sculpture, and the sculpture on it will be carved by an international master sculptor who is familiar with me. There will be small water spouts on both sides of the sculpture, and a circular indoor pool of the stadium will be added below, which happens to be the entrance of the stadium. There is a saying in Chinese that when you meet water, you will be clear, when you meet fire, you will be bright, when you meet water, you will be bright. In short, any design related to water in this location is very good in terms of geomancy. That's why I was suddenly inspired, but the people in the planning department acted too fast. Fortunately, this drawing can be used as the base, and it won't affect other design plans. Although this design is very reasonable, it is, after all, a sudden design plan. They haven't reported it to the construction bureau or us, nor discussed it with any department. They just sent the drawing directly to the construction department without authorization, which led to a large number of projects being transferred to such a new small building, which delayed the progress of the project. How do you explain this? After looking at the new design, the city leaders turned to Jean Wan. CEOG, MN Group has never been so reckless. What happened this time? Jean Wan stood in the lounge and gently clasped the bag in her hand with her fingers. She stood calmly and without any sense of nervousness. She still had a smile on her face, but the smile did not reach her eyes. It's indeed our company's fault. I'm to blame for recruiting too many interns to the planning department this year, which led to some important work and delivery procedures falling into the hands of the interns. Fortunately, this drawing was drawn by Dane, and fortunately, Dane has a very perfect design talent. This kind of design, which can turn stone into gold, helps me make up for this mistake, but the original mistake should be borne by MN Group. The engineering cost of the small building and the loss of working time will all be paid by MN Group to compensate for the delay of a few days. What do you think? In fact, Dane's design plan had been approved by the city leaders, but these people also wanted to save face. Besides, it was MN Group who made the first move, which showed that they didn't take the government seriously. If Jean Wan didn't take the initiative to admit her mistake now and take all the blame on herself, the impact on MN Group would only be greater. After all, with Dane's help, all Jean Wan needed to do now was to maintain peace with the government. It was just a loss of tens of millions of yuan, but for this matter, it was already the lowest loss, and she could show her sincerity and satisfy the government leaders. Of course, the premise was that MN Group really didn't have any ulterior motives. It was just a hidden competitor who made things difficult for them. Chapter 541. When the meeting was about to continue, the city leaders quickly skipped over this small incident against MN Group and did not continue to pester or embarrass her. After all, Jean Wan offered to pay for the loss of working time and the compensation for the project. Tens of millions was not a large number for a multinational conglomerate like MN. It was also not a large number for the city leaders, so they just muddled through this kind of thing. The city leaders left. When Jean Wan looked back, Mo Jingshan had disappeared. She lowered her eyes and pondered for a moment. Then she turned to Dane and said, "Thank you, Mr. Dane. If it weren't for your strength to help me out, I don't know what would have happened." Dane smiled at her. He had the height and white skin of a Westerner. His blue eyes looked at her with a smile. "You don't have to thank me. President Ji is so smart. You can definitely see who asked me to come here to help you." Jean Wan didn't respond but subconsciously looked in the direction of the door of the lounge again. Dane walked out with her, and the two of them walked at the back. When they reached the door, Dane said beside her, "I signed with Shine Group 3 years ago and lived in Los Angeles for a period of time. I was very close to CEO Mo. At that time, there was a woman named Shuyen by his side. I wonder if Miss Ji knows this secretary." And Jean Wan paused and turned to look at Dane. And Shuyen's mind is obviously on CEO Mo, and Chairman Mo has been trying to bring them together. I have always thought that Shuyen is a very excellent woman, and I thought they would be together. Dane said with a smile, "After all, I really can't think of any woman who can be worthy of a man like CEO Mo. Perhaps every woman is just making do with him. But I didn't expect that Shuyen would get married. I heard that it was because she was rejected by CEO Mo again and again. No matter what she said or did, she wouldn't get any response from him. In the end, she resigned from Shine Group and left Los Angeles, but fortunately, she is a very excellent woman. After changing her love target, she met the right man." Listening to Dane, Jean Wan knew that he should have something to say, so she didn't interrupt. "At that time, I was thinking, if an outstanding woman like Shuyen couldn't move President Mo's heart, then what else could?" For a moment, Jean Wan's gaze shifted to the crowd outside the break room. She did not see Mo Jingshan's figure. Her heart was in turmoil, but no one could see the change in her mood. Dane looked at her now and gave her a very meaningful smile. No matter how outstanding they were, they would not be able to move Mo Jingshan's heart. What else could tempt him? Seeing the meaning in Dane's eyes, Jean Wan smiled, raised her hand, slowly inserted her fingers into her hair, and made a gesture of pushing her hair aside. She said lightly, "Thank you again, Mr. Dane, for your help today. If there is an opportunity to cooperate in the future, I hope Dane will not refuse. After all, it's a pity that your design talent is limited to serving Shine Group." Dane burst into laughter. He only found it interesting. He was speaking meaningfully about how deeply Mr. Mo loved her, but this woman named Jean Wan was bent on stealing Mr. Mo's woman. Interesting. Dane couldn't help but laugh out loud. After going to the conference room, Jean Wan was much more relaxed. After all, the big problem that had been haunting her all day had been solved. They continued to discuss the stadium, but the meeting was coming to an end. Jean Wan was really not interested in the special conversations between the leaders at the conference table. She looked away from the meeting notes in her hand and drifted slowly. Unconsciously, she looked at the other side of the city leader. Mo Jingshan's face was expressionless, but when he sensed her gaze and turned to look at her, his dark and deep eyes seemed to contain a hint of a smile. She remembered what Dane had said just now. During the 3 years he was in the United States, and Xu Yan often tried to get close to him, but she never got any response from him. Thinking of the various things that happened in Aolan International, Jean Wan's cheeks puffed up slightly, but she still avoided his eyes and forced her attention back to the meeting. When the meeting was over, Jean Wan got up, left the city hall as quickly as possible, and went straight back to the West City district. The next afternoon, Jean Wan felt a little pain in her stomach because her period was coming. She had nothing to do in the afternoon, so she went straight back to Yuehu Bay to rest. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Jean Wan was packing up the computer and a few company files she had brought back in her study when her cell phone on the desk suddenly rang. She didn't think much and reached out to answer the phone. As he answered the call, he put the laptop aside and said, "Hello." The other side didn't speak for several seconds. "Hello?" Jean Wan thought the other side had a bad signal and asked again, "Hello, who is this?" The person on the other side still didn't speak for a long time. Jean Wan looked at her cell phone and saw it was a strange number. She frowned and was about to hang up. However, the person on the other side suddenly spoke. "Miss G." Jean Wan paused and was surprised by the voice she had just heard. After a long pause, she tried to find a possibility in her limited interpersonal relationships, but after thinking for a long time, she still felt that although she seemed to have heard this voice somewhere, it was not particularly familiar, so she couldn't recognize who this person was. The person on the other side repeated, "Miss G, am I disturbing you?" Jean Wan put down the documents and the computer in her hands and asked indifferently, "Who are you?" Hearing the calmness and wariness in her voice, the person on the other side sighed with a smile. "I'm Xiao Lui's father." With that, the person on the other side fell silent. The cold and solemn tone of a middle-aged man who had been in a superior position for a long time sounded kind and patient, and even a little tentative, as if he was afraid that she would be alarmed if he spoke too abruptly, so he continued in a slow and peaceful voice. "Miss G, do you have time?" Jean Wan didn't speak, but she was really surprised that Mr. Xiao would call her. She had never heard that the chairman of Ling Xiao Group was so approachable. Thinking of the things she had suspected before, she said indifferently, "Why does Mr. Xiao have my phone number?" Chapter 542. At 5:00 in the afternoon, on Shiha Road in the western part of the city, a white Porsche was parked outside a classical-style restaurant. Jean Wan got out of the car, answered a phone call, and turned to enter the restaurant. The bodyguard watched Jean Wan's back disappear, picked up his cell phone, and called Mo Jingshan. "Mr. Mo, what's the matter?" "Someone asked Miss G out for dinner. She drove here alone and looked very serious. She must have something on her mind. I don't know if there's anything wrong. Would you like to call her and ask her?" The man was silent for a few seconds and asked indifferently, "Where is the appointment?" "The ancient restaurant on Shiha Road." "I see." They booked the most luxurious private room in the restaurant. The waiter pushed the door open, and Jean Wan immediately saw Mr. Xiao, who had a superior aura. The middle-aged man was dressed in a very exquisite three-piece suit. Although he was over 50 years old, he still had an extraordinary aura. He looked at Jean Wan, and Jean Wan looked at him. They didn't say anything to each other, but they seemed to be quietly looking at each other. The waiter stood outside the door and felt that this man and woman, one old and one young, gave off an inexplicable feeling that there was something similar about them. He couldn't tell what it was, perhaps it was their temperament, or perhaps it was the feeling. Jean Wan looked at Xiao Zhenjuan and saw that there was no one else in the private room, not even Xiao Lui. There were surveillance cameras around the room, so it shouldn't be a problem for her to come in. However, when the waiter was about to close the door, she asked him to leave a gap on the door and not close it completely. Seeing that Jean Wan was wary, Mr. Xiao smiled kindly and didn't mind, saying, "Why are you standing at the door? Sit down." Jean Wan walked in and sat down. She casually put her bag aside and didn't look at the luxurious menu on the table. After all, she had lunch and was not hungry at this time, so she just asked the waiter to pour her a cup of hot water. It's rare for Miss G to agree to meet with me. Previously, I saw that you were very close to my son, but it seems like you haven't been in contact with him recently. Did my son do something to make you unhappy? Old Master Xiao spoke first. Jean Wan looked at the famous chairman of Ling Xiao Group in front of her and gave a faint smile. No, CEO Xiao and I are just acquaintances. Last time, at your birthday party, I was only there as his temporary female companion. We don't have much private contact. Xiao Luo's expression changed slightly. You're right. Xiao Zhenjuan smiled. Compared to the unapproachable chairman Xiao described by others, Xiao Zhenjuan seemed particularly amiable and warm. You must be hungry. Let's order some dishes first. I'm not hungry, but old Mr. Xiao invited me, so I took advantage of the fact that I have nothing to do this afternoon to keep the appointment. I just don't know why you specifically asked me to meet you. At this time, the waiter came in with a glass of water, put it by Jean Wan's hand, and then handed the menu to her. Jean Wan took it and flipped through it casually. Before she ordered, she heard him say, nothing. I used to be a close friend of your father, Ji Hongwen, but then we had some misunderstandings, so we haven't contacted each other for so many years. It's rare to see his daughter make such great achievements in the business world. I can't help but sigh with emotion at the changes of time. I didn't expect old Ji's child to be so grown up and so capable. Jean Wan's fingers paused as she flipped through the menu. She raised her eyes to look at him and curved her lips into a faint smile. Mr. Xiao, do you want to treat me to a meal just because of my father? Xiao Zhenjuan had been paying attention to the change of Jean Wan's expression, but Jean Wan had been smiling politely and faintly, but her words seemed to indicate that she had guessed something, but because it was just a guess, she was not in a hurry to ask or point it out. Of course, your mother. When Xiao Zhenjuan mentioned her mother, he paused. His eyes fell on her face as though he was looking at another person through her face. However, Jean Wan's seemingly calm eyes contained a different coldness and sharpness. He smiled again. I'm about the same age as your parents. Decades ago, we studied together in the United States. If it weren't for the fact that we haven't contacted each other these years, we could be considered friends despite our age difference. Oh, really? Jean Wan was still smiling, but she was obviously indifferent. It seemed that the matter that she had suspected before had one more piece of evidence. But she didn't dare to think in that direction. The Xiao family, and her? Was it possible? Mr. Xiao didn't talk much with her. He mostly asked about Jean Wan's experience in England and occasionally asked her about her childhood in the Ji family. It seemed that he paid attention to her because of her parents, but he didn't talk about many things about Ji Hongwen and her mother. After talking for more than an hour, Jean Wan didn't want to continue sitting here because of her stomach pain and physical discomfort, but before ending the topic, she asked, Mr. Xiao, my mother passed away when I was very young. Since you and my parents have known each other for a long time, why don't you tell me what kind of woman my mother is? Xiao Zhenjuan took a deep look at her because of the question that sounded abrupt but seemed to have been prepared for a long time. Jean Wan didn't avoid his gaze but just looked into his eyes and smiled. Xiao Zhenjuan put his hand on the table, holding a glass of water. He pinched the glass for a long time and said in a low voice, Your mother is a very, very good woman. Very good? Since she was so good, shouldn't she have a happy and perfect marriage and family and live happily for the rest of her life? But why did she die so early? Although I was young at that time and didn't investigate much about her for so many years, I also knew that she was depressed because of serious depression. When she died in the hospital, she was already thin. A good woman ended her life in such a miserable way. What was good about her? Xiao Zhenjuan didn't speak but just looked at her. Although he wanted to say something, he didn't. Because he had been in the top position of the company for many years, he knew what he should say and what he shouldn't say. Obviously, he didn't intend to reveal some things. Then why did he ask her to meet him? Jean Wan smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She said coldly, I'm not feeling well. I'll go back first. Goodbye. With that, she turned around without hesitation. She opened the door and walked out in high heels. She bumped into a wall of people, and a familiar cool breath rushed into her nose. Chapter 543. Jean Wan's feet only slipped. Thankfully, she did not sprain her ankle. She abruptly raised her eyes to see Mo Jingshan's haunting face in front of her. She rushed to step back, but the man's arm held her waist firmly, easily pressing her back into his embrace. Seeing that her complexion was slightly pale, Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. Sprained your ankle? Jean Wan pursed her lips and did not speak. Seeing that she could not break free, she said, no. Before she finished speaking, the man had decisively reached out and picked her up. Jean Wan almost cried out in surprise when her feet were suddenly suspended in the air. She turned to look in shock at the man who had suddenly picked her up. Her complexion was slightly pale because her period was approaching and she was not feeling well. She did not sprain her ankle at all. Why was he carrying her? Mo Jingshan glanced back at the tightly shut private room door. Jean Wan saw from his gaze that he clearly knew who the person inside was without her saying a word or explaining anything. He directly carried her away. Mo Jingshan, put me down. Jean Wan's stomach was not feeling well. Although this floor was surrounded by private rooms, there were many people eating downstairs. She did not want to be carried out by him. My ankle is fine. Put me down. What did you talk about? Why is your complexion so pale? The man did not carry her down the stairs but went to the elevator on the other side. After entering the elevator, he did not intend to put her down. He only glanced at her ankle, which appeared to be fine, and then looked at her face. Nothing much. He's just an old friend of my dad's. Jean Wan struggled in his arms. This was the second floor, and it only took a few seconds to reach the first floor. The moment the door opened, she saw someone outside. She subconsciously rushed to bury her face in his shoulder to avoid being recognized. The man calmly carried her out. However, because of the woman's buried face in his shoulder, his lips curved slightly. He leaned close to her ear to say, "What are you shy about? They're just two waiters." From the elevator, they could walk directly to the door without passing through the crowd downstairs. There were only two waiters here, but they obviously didn't dare to look in their direction for too long and had already turned around to avoid them. Jean Wan slowly raised her eyes from his shoulder and looked around. Seeing that there was no one around, she patted his shoulder hard and said with a fierce expression, "Put me down." Mo Jingshan saw that her ankle really wasn't injured and that she was struggling hard. Afraid that she might accidentally fall, he put her down. As soon as her feet touched the ground, Jean Wan quickly took 2 steps away from him as if she had been electrocuted, and then quickly took 2 or 3 steps out of the restaurant. When she reached the door, she asked, "Why are you here?" Mo Jingshan did not explain, calmly saying, "Passing by." This was the western district of the city. How could a busy man like him pass by this place for no reason? Jean Wan did not plan on speaking with him. She was about to head to the parking lot when she saw a black Porsche of the same model parked beside her car. Her footsteps paused. She looked at her white Porsche and then at the black Porsche parked by the side. It was exactly the same as her car except for the black color. Just as she was thinking that this car looked like a couple's car parked here, the black Porsche's headlights suddenly lit up. Her eyelids twitched. She turned around and saw that the car key was in Mo Jingshan's hand. Jean Wan, the man walked over without a change in expression. He walked past her car and glanced at her indifferently because she was standing stiffly in front of the car. "Why are you in a daze? Come here. I'll show you something." Jean Wan remained rooted to the spot until she saw the man open the black Porsche's door. This car, is yours? Jin Wan asked. Mo Jingshan did not reply. He only glanced at her. The answer was obvious. The corner of Jin Wan's mouth twitched. She looked at her white Porsche and then at his black Porsche of the same model. So, when he asked her what car she liked last time, and she did not answer, he bought the same one as hers? He threw a limited edition Ghost worth tens of millions into the sea and bought a Porsche worth more than 2 million to be a couple's car with her? For a moment, Jin Wan felt as though she did not know Mo Jingshan anymore. The great Mo Jingshan, how could he be so shameless, who wanted to be a couple's car with him? Did he ask her for her opinion? And it was parked so brazenly next to her car? The man opened the car door and took out a document from the car. He ignored Jin Wan's burning eyes that seemed to be filled with anger because of his car and handed it to her. What's this? Jin Wan received the document in confusion and glanced at it. It turned out to be a business summit arranged by the government and Jing City. High City's Shine Group and MN Group had been invited to attend. There was also a meeting for the two companies because of the stadium project, but it was to be held in Jing City. Jin Wan flipped through the document and then looked up at the calm man in horror. You want me to go to Jing City with you on a business trip? The man closed the car door and glanced at her. Is there a problem? Jin Wan stared at him. This is a big problem. Your Shine Group has cooperation with the business and political circles in Jing City, but MN Group has always been in London. It hasn't been long since we moved back to China. I have no contact with Jing City, nor do I have any cooperation projects. Just because of the construction of the largest stadium in the country, you can go to Jing City on behalf of the two companies. I'm clearly not qualified to go to Jing City. Who on earth put me in? There was no need for anyone to answer her. She knew who the culprit was. In a place like Jing City, the opportunity to meet with various leaders and big shots in the business world was hard to come by. There were few people in the country who had the ability to put her in. Being glared at by her, Mo Jingshan smiled mildly. I want you to go to Jing City to meet more people. This will have a good effect on your status in the domestic business world. What? You don't appreciate my kindness? Chapter 544. The man said flatly, you won't get a second chance like this. Do you want to give up this good opportunity because of me or go to Beijing with me? Make your choice. Jin Wan didn't speak. Her period was coming, and her stomach was uncomfortable, so she couldn't think. But then she remembered that she would be on her period, and half of the suitcase would have to be filled with sanitary pads, which was really inconvenient. But the government had already issued the document, and she couldn't resist it. She took the document, opened the car door, got in, and slammed the door. 2 days later, on her way to the airport, Jin Wan received a WeChat message from Yen Gu. Sister Wan, have you recovered? Can you go out soon? When will I go back to work? Jin Wan, I'm going to Beijing for a business trip. I'll let you know when I come back. Yen Gu, you're not really going to fire me, are you? A grieved face, Jin Wan, no, if I really didn't need a bodyguard by my side, I wouldn't have let you come from the very beginning. Having a plainclothes SWAT officer by my side every day gives me a sense of security. I definitely wouldn't let you go. Yen Gu stared at the phone for a while and smiled. Are you going to Beijing alone? When will you come back? Do you need me to go with you? Jin Wan, no, I'm going with the people of Shine Group. I don't know when I'll come back. I heard it will take at least half a month. Yen Gu, Shine Group? Your ex-husband's company? You're going with CEO Mo? She replied, yes. Yen Gu stared at his phone for a long time and sent a voice message in frustration. Then, Sister Wan, be careful. Your ex-husband means that you two are no longer in a relationship. Be careful not to be taken advantage of by others. Let me know when you come back. I'll pick you up at the airport. When she arrived at the airport, the driver hurriedly put down her luggage and left. Jean Wan stood in the lobby of the departure lounge with a 30-inch large suitcase, watching the passengers coming and going. It was less than an hour before boarding time. She waited for several minutes but didn't see Mo Jingshan or the people around him. As time went by, she called Mo Jingshan so as not to delay boarding. However, the moment she dialed Mo Jingshan's private number, the call was hung up after a single ring. Jean Wan was startled by the sound of the phone being hung up. Before she could put down the phone, a long arm had reached over and rested on the handle of her suitcase. The man's long and slender fingers pressed on the switch and pulled out the lever. At the same time, a faint voice sounded above her head, "Let's go." Jean Wan abruptly raised her head, only to see that Mo Jingshan had already pushed her suitcase toward the VIP security checkpoint. Only then did she put down her phone. Because the man was tall and had long legs, she did not wear high heels because she had to catch a flight today. However, even if she was wearing flat shoes, it would be difficult to catch up with him after a few steps, so she could only jog to catch up with him. However, just as she ran over, she did not expect the man to suddenly stop in his tracks. Jean Wan almost bumped into his back. The moment her forehead touched his back, she subconsciously took a large step back and barely steadied herself. She then raised her eyes. "Why did you suddenly stop?" Mo Jingshan glanced at the suitcase in his hand and then back at her. "You're going to Jing City on a business trip for half a month, not half a year. Why did you bring so much luggage?" Jean Wan also glanced at the oversized 30-inch suitcase that belonged to her. If it weren't for her period, she wouldn't have needed to prepare 2 large bags of tampons. Originally, a 20-inch suitcase would have been enough, but although the tampons were not heavy, they took up a lot of space, so she had to bring a large one. Besides, she was a woman. It was already very unrefined to only bring one suitcase for a business trip for half a month. Could it be that he expected her to be as compact as him? "It's almost my period. I've only prepared some necessities in it." Jean Wan raised her hand to tousle her hair and then raised her head to show him a very careless smile. Previously, Yan Gu had told her to be careful and be careful not to be taken advantage of. Although this business trip coincided with the arrival of her period, at least she was protected by it. Even if Mo Jingshan was a wolf with wild ambitions, he couldn't possibly do anything to her at such a time. When the man heard the words period, his gaze finally fell on her face, which looked good because of the light makeup she had put on today. From this, he finally found the reason why her complexion was not very good. It was almost time to board the plane. Mo Jingshan did not speak anymore and pushed her suitcase to the VIP passage. In front of them, there were 2 foreigners queuing for security checks. Jean Wan walked behind Mo Jingshan. Looking at the man's unusually silent back, she couldn't help smiling. For the first time in her life, she felt that her period had come at such a good time. After passing through the VIP passage, Jean Wan walked toward the departure lounge while putting the cell phone she had just taken out back into her bag. Suddenly, she heard the man walking beside her say flatly, "I remember that your period only lasts 4 or 5 days a month." Her footsteps abruptly paused. She abruptly raised her eyes and saw the man calmly pushing her suitcase into the first-class lounge. Jean Wan, after entering the departure lounge, a male assistant who looked unfamiliar walked over. "Hello, CEO G. I'm Xiao Hu, the assistant accompanying CEO Mo on this trip to Beijing." Jean Wan had thought that Shen Mu would follow them to Jing City. She didn't expect to see a new face. She nodded politely. While Xiao Hu went to the water dispenser to fetch water for Jean Wan went inside to ask, "Why didn't Shen Mu come with you?" "He has something to do at home and took half a month's leave." Jean Wan turned back to look at Xiao Hu. She saw that he moved quickly. Generally speaking, those who could be allowed to accompany Mo Jingshan on business trips were more reliable. After all, Mo Jingshan had always been a good judge of character. She didn't say anything more. She found a seat and sat down. She took out her cell phone and browsed the internet. She saw that she had recently added a lot of acquaintances on WeChat and finally clicked on a pink app for recording menstruation. There was still one day before her period came. She raised her hand and rubbed her stomach. Although her period didn't hurt as much as it used to, it still felt uncomfortable. Usually, Little 8 would prepare the brown sugar water and heat pad for her. Now that Little 8 wasn't by her side, she was actually not used to it. Chapter 545. Thank you, Xiaohu. Jean Wan immediately picked up the disposable cup of hot water and took a sip. In addition to feeling uncomfortable during her period, she would also feel uncomfortable for a few days before her period. It was indeed the most fortunate thing for her to have hot water to drink at this time. You're welcome. CEO Mo asked me to bring you hot water. Xiaohu saw that Jean Wan had already drunk half the cup of water and asked, Do you want more hot water? I'll go get another cup. Jean Wan did not speak as she placed the cup down. She only glanced at Mo Jingshen, who was sitting opposite her. Xiaohu did not wait for her to speak and went to bring her another cup of hot water. Jean Wan struggled internally for a moment before receiving the cup and drinking another cup. Her stomach felt much better. By the time she entered the departure lounge, it was already close to boarding time. She had only drunk 2 cups of water when the announcement for boarding sounded. Jean Wan stood up and was about to take her suitcase when Mo Jingshen had already stood up. He avoided her hand. Follow behind me obediently. As he spoke, he had already pushed her suitcase out. Xiaohu finally noticed that CEO Mo seemed to be very concerned about MN Group's CEO G. As he walked behind Jean Wan, he could not help but glance at her face. Jean Wan pretended not to notice Xiaohu's curious expression. She knew that if the person by his side was not Shenmu, such a situation would definitely occur. Right now, there was nothing much to explain. She could only silently follow him out. Xiaohu was completely unaware of the situation. He watched as the big boss pushed the suitcase in front while CEO G walked behind like a supervisor. He secretly cursed in his heart. This CEO G's treatment was really unparalleled. By the time they landed in Jing City, it was already autumn. Jean Wan planned to take out a coat from her suitcase and put it on before heading to the bathroom. She pushed her suitcase into the bathroom and had just put on her coat when she heard her phone ring. She took out her phone and heard a child's childish, ah. Jean Wan did not react at first. After listening for a while, she seemed to recall something. She lowered her head to look at the number displayed on her phone. It was indeed Xia Tian's call. So this voice should be from Xia Tian's little baby. Jean Wan could not help but smile. Little baby, what do you want to say to Auntie Wan Wan? You want to drink the best milk powder? Oh, you still want the prettiest toy? Alright, when Auntie Nuanyuan comes back from her business trip, I'll buy you a toy car, okay? Have you wet your bed recently? No. So awesome. You're so obedient. Before she could finish, Xia Tian had already taken over the phone. I just wanted my son to say hello to you. You're really good at acting. You've already chatted with him for so long. Let me tell you, my son is still young. He doesn't even know how to speak yet. Don't spoil him so early that he'll have the bad habit of asking you for anything he wants. Jean Wan was immediately amused. But I heard him to me. He was clearly acting coquettishly with me. My son knows how to act coquettishly now. He's only 2 months old and he's already calling you mummy. Stop daydreaming. How can a 2-month-old call for mama? I clearly heard his sounds coming out of his mouth. If he calls for mama now, there's an 80% chance that he'll be a prodigy. Jean Wan couldn't help but laugh. TSK, of course my child will be a child prodigy. Sounds just like mummy. I'll just take it that he learned to call me mummy first. Xia Tian said with a smile. Where are you? Why haven't you come to help me hold the child these days? I'm on a business trip. I just arrived in Beijing. Why did you go to Beijing? With whom? Yourself? Jean Wan paused and thought for a moment. She did not mention that Imo Jingshan was also there. Otherwise, based on Xia Tian's temper, coupled with the fact that she was bored from taking care of the child at home every day, who knew how many more questions she would bombard her with? I'm just here for a meeting. I'll be back in a few days. Tell your little baby to wait for me to buy him a toy car. Xia Tian heard the airport announcement coming from Jean Wan's side and did not pester her any further. All right. You're busy in Beijing. I'm hanging up. Let the little baby talk to me one more time before hanging up. Jean Wan had just finished speaking when she heard Xia Tian's little baby being sent to the phone's side. He let out a series of cute, childish, sounds. Jean Wan smiled, and her heart softened. She said sweetly to the phone, "Kiss, I love you, Mo Jingshan," who had come out to wait for her because Jean Wan had not come out of the bathroom for a long time, heard these words the moment he walked over. The man's eyelids moved slightly, and his heart palpitated without warning. Jean Wan hung up the phone and walked out of the bathroom. However, she was caught off guard by the man standing outside the bathroom door. Her heart jumped. Although she was not frightened, she was still surprised. She originally wanted to ask why he was here, but the words on the tip of her tongue became, "CEO actually has the habit of standing outside the women's bathroom and eavesdropping? You were inside for half an hour. I came over to ask someone to go in and look for you, but I heard you were on the phone, so I didn't disturb you." The man's voice was low and calm. Jean Wan lowered her head, put the phone back into her bag, and adjusted the coat she had just put on. Are we going directly to the meeting place or to the hotel? What's the itinerary like for the next few days? Mo Jingshan did not answer. He took the suitcase she pushed out and put his hand on the handle. Who were you talking to on the phone? Jean Wan suddenly glanced at him, and a shrewd smile appeared in her eyes that were as calm as a lake, disturbing the tranquility of the lake. However, this sudden ripple was caught by the man's calm eyes. She said with a smile, "A little handsome boy, the kind that makes people want to hug and kiss him at first glance. I just promised to buy him a car after I return from Jing City." She thought these words could fool him for a while, but the man stared at her for a long time, raised the corner of his lips, and said lazily, "I haven't said anything since Xia Tian's child was born. Leave the car to me, N. Do you want a real car or a toy car? I'll have everything." Mo Jingshan lowered his head and couldn't help laughing. He carried her suitcase, striding toward the exit of the airport hall. Jean Wan watched the man's back, and her teeth itched. She couldn't help but secretly grind them. Since he had already seen through it, why did he still ask? On purpose? Chapter 546. It was evening when they arrived in Beijing. At this time, the only choice was to go straight to the hotel and arrange all the business after tonight. In the car, Jean Wan and Mo Jingshan sat in the back seat, while Xiao Hu and the driver sent by Beijing sat in the front. Jean Wan looked at her cell phone for a while and then turned to look at the sunset. Thinking that they would stay in Beijing tonight, she couldn't help asking, "Which hotel are we staying in?" "The Xingtang Hotel in Haiyang District. The room has been booked. You can rest as soon as you arrive." Xiao Hu sat in the front and answered, "CEOG, just have breakfast before 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. We have a meeting at 7:30. There are not many things to do tomorrow, but in addition to the meeting the day after tomorrow, there is a very important banquet to attend in Beijing tonight. CEOG, you should have brought a dress, right? There is a banquet to attend?" Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. "Yes, it's a charity banquet arranged by the business circle in Beijing. It's rare that CEO Mo has time to attend, so this banquet will be more grand. We must also attend." Jean Wan didn't prepare a dress, but in a place as prosperous as High City, she could find a department store or a custom-made dress shop. When they arrived at the hotel, Jean Wan looked up at the legendary Shengtang Hotel in Beijing and thought of another important question. Do you live on the same floor as me? Jean Wan turned to look at Imo Jingshan, who had already gotten out of the car. The man smiled. We're on a business trip together. For the convenience of traveling together, of course, we live on the same floor. Otherwise, what do you think? Jean Wan, after arriving at the room, Xiao Hu wanted to help Jean Wan carry her luggage in. After all, the corridor upstairs was covered with long and thick carpets, and it was inconvenient to push the suitcase, so she had to carry it. However, when he saw that CEO Mo still helped her carry the suitcase without complaint and he didn't need to intervene at all, he hesitated and decided not to follow them. The door opened. Jean Wan looked back at Mo Jingshan and reached out to take the suitcase. Here we are. Thank you. The man ignored her words, pushed the door open the moment it opened, and walked in. Jean Wan stared at the man's back and pursed her lips for a long time before walking in. I can leave my suitcase here. You don't have to come in. After the man entered the door, he directly put down her suitcase. The huge suitcase in his hand seemed to have grown legs and automatically leaned against the wall to steady itself. When the suitcase hit the wall, it made a small bang sound. Jean Wan paused and subconsciously kept the door open. She walked in and was about to open her suitcase to pack her things. At the same time, to show him that she was busy, she wanted him to leave. However, the man only glanced at her from the side. Just as Jean Wan was about to bend down to touch the suitcase, he took long strides toward her. Jean Wan watched him approach and immediately placed her hand on the lever. She looked at him and said, Go do whatever you need to do. I'm not feeling well these days. Don't provoke me. Otherwise, don't blame me for falling out with you. The man stood in front of her, bent down, and leaned down little by little. She was squatting down now, but the man was standing in such a posture. She was at a disadvantage in this position. Jean Wan held on, not being forced to sit in the corner by his aura. The distance between the two of them grew closer and closer. It was so close that she could clearly feel the man's slightly hot breath blowing against her collarbone. She was even more sensitive to the feeling of his breath brushing against her pores, causing the air around her to be dominated by his breath. When there was only half a finger's distance between them, he stopped approaching, causing Jean Wan's tense body to tighten even more. Her stomach hurt. She had to hold her stomach with one hand and hold the lever with the other to prevent herself from falling to the ground. As a result, she couldn't even pull out her hand to push him. Jean Wan. The man called her name. Although he used her full name, his voice was low and husky, making her feel that her name was about to melt in his voice. Her expression was guarded. What's wrong? Mo Jingshan chuckled huskily. You don't really dislike going on a business trip with me, do you? Even though Jean Wan might fall to the ground unsteadily, she still moved her hand away from the lever and tried to stand up. However, the man in front of her did not move away, and she couldn't just bump into him. After 2 seconds of hesitation, she took a step back and sat on the carpet behind her. The man leaned very close. Seeing that she wouldn't catch a cold sitting on the thick carpet, he didn't reach out to help her up. He moved closer and closer, so close that his words seemed to be whispering, so close that it seemed as though his lips would touch hers at any moment. However, he didn't really touch her and kept the distance between them within half a finger's distance. He was clearly so close, clearly pressing down on her, but it seemed as though he wanted to come closer and yet didn't. It was as though he was invisibly seducing her. When the man looked into her eyes for a long time, his eyes darkened, and he lowered his eyes to kiss her. Jean Wan decisively raised her hand to cover her mouth, and the man's kiss immediately fell on the back of her hand. Mo Jingshan watched her cover her mouth, his handsome brows moved, and a low chuckle escaped his throat. He didn't argue with her and said softly, If you like to have your own business, I won't stop you. After all, MN Group is your blood and sweat. You can do whatever you want to do for it. You can spread your wings and fly high, but you can't fly into someone else's arms. Do you still remember the suggestion I made at AO Lawn International? What suggestion? Jean Wan frowned. She had been forced to the corner by him and leaned against the wall. Be Mrs. Mo again. When the man spoke, he slightly lowered his head again. Jean Wan had put down her hand when she spoke, so he suddenly touched her lips. However, he didn't kiss her too deeply. Jean Wan even clearly felt that she was being kissed by him, but it was just a light touch. He didn't push her too close, nor did he press her too hard. However, the man's heavy breathing and hoarse voice made her strangely feel as though she had been pressed here and violated by him. No. Jean Wan refused him without thinking. Compared with her cold expression of rejection, Mo Jingshan's expression could be said to be calm. I'm not in a hurry. Sooner or later, I'll make the word no disappear from your mouth and come back willingly. Mrs. Mo, N. Chapter 547. Mo Jingshan watched her for a moment. He saw that she had spent too much time on the plane and in the car, and the light makeup on her face had faded. Her originally pale complexion was now obvious. Based on her menstrual cycle, she did need to rest early. Remember? Jean Wan, she glared at him. The man did not speak. She glared at him, unconsciously using a warning tone. Mo Jingshan, I'm telling you, if my poor health affects your work here, don't blame me for dragging you down. If I continue to sit here, it will only make me feel worse. If I can't get up tomorrow. Seeing that she was so angry that she could say such words without any threat, his voice carried a smile. Kiss me, and I'll help you up. Jean Wan glared at him. Mo Jingshan, you're the epitome of despicable and shameless. Even if you want to take advantage of someone, you have to look at the situation first. You found out. The man smiled. Indeed, I'm taking advantage of someone. As expected, I wasn't wrong to say that you're a beast in human clothing. Unhappily, Jean Wan tried to push him away again, but when she frowned unhappily, the man quickly kissed her on the cheek. It was only a light kiss, but he picked her up and put her on the bed. Jean Wan, who had only wanted to stand up, was carried onto the bed in the blink of an eye. Rest well. If you're hungry, call the hotel and have them send you food. Wake up on time tomorrow. Don't sleep in. Jean Wan, your stomach hasn't been feeling well these days. Remember not to use cold water when you shower, N. Seeing that she did not respond, the man dragged out his words. His tone was heavy, but it carried an indescribable sense of indulgence and pampering. After finally sending Great Boss Missouri away, Jean Wan watched as the man closed the door behind him. She then relaxed and laid back on the bed with her arms and legs spread out. Rushing to catch a plane and a car was the most tiring. She wanted to sleep for a while before waking up for dinner. She lay on the bed and did not move. Not long after, the man's gentle and mild words lingered in her ears. Go back to being Mrs. Mo. Jean Wan flipped over and covered her head with a pillow. When she woke up the next day, her period arrived on time. Her stomach hurt so much that it felt like it was about to cramp. Jean Wan curled up on the bed for a long time before she sat up. Seeing that it was 7:30, she got up to wash up. After all, she came to Beijing for work, not for a vacation. However, just as she got out of bed and put on the white soft slippers in the hotel room, she suddenly heard her phone ring. She picked up her phone and glanced at it. It was an unknown number. Puzzled, she picked it up and heard Xiao Hu say, "CEOG, did I disturb your rest?" Jean Wan recognized Xiao Hu's voice. She rubbed her stomach as she stood up and softly answered, "No, I'm already up. Give me 10 minutes. I'll be downstairs immediately." With that, she was about to head to the bathroom. "CEOG, you don't have to come. CEOMO and I have already left the hotel. This morning's work schedule is a bit more complicated. I'll sign in for you in the name of MN Group. Are you not feeling well today? Then rest in the hotel first, leave it to me. Jean Wan paused. You've already set off? Yes, I had originally arranged for the hotel's wake-up call service, but CEOMO asked me to cancel it. He said that CEOG is not feeling well and asked you to rest in the hotel for a day. It just so happens that this morning's meeting is just a formality. There are no important people today, so there's no need to meet so many people in person. I'll sign in your name. There won't be any problems. CEOG, you can rest assured. Jean Wan knew that it was not suitable for her to travel during her period. The pain during her period was sometimes good and sometimes bad. When it was good, the pain was not so severe, but occasionally, because of frequent overtime work, her endocrine system would be disturbed, and then on a certain month, the pain would be heart-wrenching. Although the problem of the cold in the womb was much better, the pain during her period was still the most painful. In the past 3 years, she had stayed in London as much as possible during these days of each month and rarely went out. This time, when she suddenly came to Beijing, she had been prepared to endure all kinds of discomfort, but she didn't expect that she would still become the one being taken care of. Well, if there's anything I need to be involved in, please let me know in time. I'll make preparations. Don't delay the schedule, Jean Wan said softly. All right, I'll contact you at any time. After speaking, Xiaohu hung up the phone and turned to look at Mo Jingshan sitting in the back of the car. CEOG's voice sounds weak. It seems that she is really uncomfortable. Shall we call a doctor to check on her? Mo Jingshan didn't say anything. Mo Jingshan's handsome face showed no emotion. He did not respond. Xiaohu turned back to chat with the driver. After a moment, he picked up his cell phone and was about to call Qin Sighting when he remembered what Jean Wan said last time. His fingers paused on the screen for a moment, skimmed over Qin Sighting's number, chose a doctor he was more familiar with, and called him. In the next few minutes, Xiaohu felt that his understanding of CEOMO had been completely shattered. He actually heard CEOMO, who usually didn't even have an extra woman by his side, calmly ask a woman if there was any more effective and faster way to relieve pain during menstrual pain besides brown sugar water. After listening for a while, Xiaohu decided to look down and pretend he heard nothing. In the afternoon, when they were about to return to the hotel after finishing several tasks outside, Mo Jingshan asked them to stop on the road, and then Xiaohu saw his boss get out of the car and go to a large chain pharmacy by the road. When Mo Jingshan returned to the car, Xiaohu didn't need to look to know that the bag in his hand was filled with things he bought for CEOG. Was CEO Mo's spring coming, or was CEO Mo chasing CEOG? That shouldn't be the case. There were so many women who secretly liked CEO Mo. Even in High City's entertainment circle, there were countless women who wanted to hug CEO Mo's thigh, but CEO Mo never looked them in the eye. He could definitely be described as cold, heartless, and unwavering. They were all like skeletons without the slightest interest. Although he didn't know how CEO Mo treated the woman he liked, based on his vigorous and decisive attitude at work, he should be very strong and decisive to the woman he liked. He didn't expect that the iceberg CEO Mo would have such a patient side to the woman he liked. Chapter 548. By the time Mo Jingshan returned to the hotel, it was already afternoon. The room service staff said that Miss G had not come out all day. She only ordered a simple lunch and did not call the room service again. When Mo Jingshan entered, the woman on the bed was lying on her side, slightly curled up. Her breathing was quiet and even. She was buried in the quilt and did not move. It seemed that she had been sleeping. The man's elegant and deep brows furrowed. He took long strides and approached the bed. Under the soft light in the room, the woman's clean face was illuminated. However, her face was paler than usual, and her lips were almost colorless. Her eyelashes were very long, casting a faint shadow on her thin and pale face. Her shoulder-length hair was spread on the pillow, and her body was still bent in sleep as she endured the pain in her stomach. Jean Wan had long been accustomed to the discomfort during these days of the month, so she habitually slept through these days when it was too painful. After a long time, she could fall asleep in such bursts of pain. At least in this way, the pain could be reduced a little. But obviously, she was also enduring the pain in her sleep, and her brows were slightly furrowed when she slept. The curtains in this room were tightly closed, blocking all the light from the outside. There was only the light from the wall lamp by the bedside. In fact, Jean Wan had been sleeping, but when she heard someone coming in, she woke up but did not open her eyes. She was clearly here on a business trip, but she had to rest in the hotel on the first day. No matter whether today's work was important or not, she instinctively felt that she was dragging her company down and felt uncomfortable. Right now, she was not in the mood to face Mo Jingshan. The room was extremely quiet. Jean Wan did not move. It was not until the sound of the door closing entered her ears that her slightly tense nerves relaxed a little. She opened her eyes, looked at the room that still had only one wall lamp, looked at the tightly closed curtains, and then closed her eyes again, preparing to continue sleeping. Anyway, the pain would only be the most in the next 2 days. When her period was about to end, it would not be so uncomfortable. The man's cool breath surrounded her from behind. Jean Wan's relaxed nerves immediately tightened. Earlier, when she heard the sound of the door closing, she thought that Mo Jingshan had left, but she did not expect that he did not leave and only went to close the door. She froze. Other than the refreshing fragrance of plants, the man's body also smelled of travel. Following that, her pajamas were pulled open. All the hairs on her body stood on end. Just as she was about to resist, the man's warm palm was already pressed against her cold abdomen. Jean Wan paused. Their skin pressed against each other without any obstruction, causing her hair to stand on end. The warmth of the man's palm caused all the pores on her body to tighten. She did not move, but when the man's breath brushed against her neck, she immediately grasped the bedsheet sensitively. She moved her head to dodge, but the man's hand seemed to be fixed on her lower abdomen and did not move away. Just as she was about to turn over, she suddenly felt the bedside sink a little. The man simply lay down by her side and easily pressed all her movements. He reached behind her neck and pulled her into his arms, while the other hand remained pressed against her abdomen. Mo Jingshan, who gave you permission to enter my room again? Does everyone have a room card of this hotel? I'm still sleeping. Do you think I can come in just because you say so? Jean Wan was held in his arms. She raised her eyes to meet the man's deep, ink-black eyes under the dim light. The man did not speak but increased the strength of his hand on her lower abdomen. It was not until Jean Wan pushed him hard that he said seriously, "Be obedient. Does your stomach hurt? Do you still have the energy to struggle? Don't I have thousands of ways to relieve my stomach pain? If you really wanted to make me feel better, you could have asked your assistant to buy me a few heat pads or a hot water bottle on the way back. But you directly used your hand. Do you really think I don't know what you're thinking? Me going on a business trip with you doesn't mean I..." Before she could finish her sentence, her face was cupped. She was startled and was accurately kissed by his lips. Without any explanation, Mo Jingshan pried open her lips and kissed her. The kiss was deep and heavy, and Jean Wan's brain almost exploded in an instant. He kissed her because he couldn't win against her in words. What was wrong with this man? Jean Wan couldn't push him away. She was almost completely trapped in his arms and pressed under him. After a few hard pushes, she lost the strength to push him away. The pain in her stomach made her hate herself for being so weak for a few days every month. She refused to close her eyes and stared at him like fire. As they kissed, the man's dry hand, without a trace of sweat, moved away from her lower abdomen and turned to hold her waist without any hindrance. His body completely covered hers, and the kiss became deeper and deeper. While Jean Wan was still glaring at him, the man covered her eyes with his hand. Jean Wan was forced to close her eyes, and as soon as she closed them, she couldn't control her emotions. When the man felt that she had slowed down, he patiently and gently kissed her on the lips and didn't continue. Jean Wan opened her eyes because there was finally space on her lips. The moment she opened her eyes, she became clear again. Soberly, she reached out to pull the man's hand away from her lower abdomen. Mo Jingshan. N. The man's voice sounded particularly dull and low in the dimly lit room, but it was so sexy and lazy that it made her heart skip a beat. Your stomach hurts so much. Why didn't you ask the hotel staff to boil some brown sugar water for you? Jean Wan turned her face away to avoid his breath. It won't do much to drink it. It won't hurt so much for more than half an hour after I drink it, but it'll be the same after a while. There's no need to bother the hotel staff. The man said in a low voice, so you just put up with it? She said flatly, I'm used to it. Before the divorce, Mo Jingshan or Auntie Chen would watch her drink some hot milk or brown sugar water every night, so her monthly period was much better. But in the next 3 years, she could only live a regular life and keep exercising. How could she take care of such a delicate thing? Besides, she was so busy that she didn't have time to insist on heating up brown sugar or ginger tea every night. It had been 3 years. As time went by, she got used to it. She was no longer as delicate as when Mo Jingshan was by her side. She had long given up the idea of being pretentious. Chapter 549. He said hoarsely in a low voice, get used to what? Curling up in bed like a shrimp, deliberately making me feel sorry for you? Jean Wan's face darkened. You're the shrimp. Mo Jingshan's hand was still pressed against her abdomen, and he gently kissed her cheek. Jean Wan was held in his arms and did not resist, but she glared at him. You should know when to take advantage of me. If you still want to take advantage of me in my current situation, you're really inhumane. Mo Jingshan paused and chuckled. I've done many inhumane things. Do I need you to do this? Hiss, take your hand away. His palm pressed against her abdomen seemed to have a steady stream of heat. This feeling made her want to rely on him when she was vulnerable, and Jean Wan instinctively resisted. He did not let go of her but held her tighter after she spoke. When Jean Wan glared at him, he bent down and whispered in her ear, I'm sorry. I didn't expect your menstrual period would change, and I didn't expect that my arranged business trip would coincide with yours. If you're really uncomfortable, you can reduce your work schedule. Don't make things too difficult for yourself. Jean Wan pursed her lips. There's nothing to be sorry about. I know my own physical condition. It's not a big deal. I'll be fine after a day or two of sleep. She knew that Mo Jingshan remembered her menstrual period. 3 years ago, these few days of every month were very stable, and the time was also very accurate. However, when she first went to the UK, all kinds of physical and psychological pressure and emotions were weighing on her. Perhaps it was too much pressure, so she wasn't very stable for a few months. Her period was either too early or too late. Later, when she finally stabilized, her monthly period was no longer the same as it was 3 years ago. In fact, Jean Wan didn't have to come to Jing City these days, but on the one hand, she really didn't want to miss this good opportunity. Besides, even if she was angry with Mo Jingshan, she didn't have to be so irrational as to miss such a good opportunity. However, she neglected that her menstrual period was only 4 or 5 days long, and she neglected her physical condition. This was simply lifting a rock and smashing it on one's own feet. Not only did it not hurt others, but it was also about to kill itself. Mo Jingshan pinched her chin. He had to admit that a 3-year absence would indeed make it difficult for a man to remain unruffled. However, the little woman in his arms was in a special situation. He could only look at her but not touch her. Seeing that she was in so much pain, he lowered his voice and said, I'll help you warm your stomach. If you want to sleep, you can continue sleeping. How can I sleep with you here? The man curled his lips. If you're not going to sleep, why don't we continue kissing for a while? The severity of a woman's menstrual cycle is directly proportional to the tension in the brain. In other words, the more you concentrate on thinking about where it hurts, the more it hurts. Why don't you do something else? Once you feel happy, your body will instinctively release dopamine and activate your brain cells. This can also help relieve the pain. Jean Wan, which doctor came up with this fallacious reasoning? She quickly turned her face away to prevent him from kissing her again. Under the dim light, Mo Jingshan could not see her face clearly. However, the little woman's posture of holding her breath and twisting her body to avoid facing him was enough to explain her current expression. Jean Wan closed her eyes and did not speak for a moment. The man also laid by her side and did not move further. He only helped her press against her throbbing abdomen. When she was about to fall asleep, she closed her eyes and said, "You'd better get someone to buy some heat pads for me to put on." "All right, you sleep first." The man's voice was as though he was coaxing a child, warm and patient. Jean Wan woke up after sleeping for several hours. When she got up, she found that Mo Jingshan was no longer around. However, the room was filled with the fragrance of Chinese medicine. She then felt the heat on her stomach. She lowered her head to see that there was a pack of Chinese medicine on her abdomen. The heat came from the pack and was very warm. No wonder she had slept so comfortably earlier and was not woken up by the pain. It was actually because of this. Where did Mo Jingshan go to buy this? He couldn't have specially asked the doctor, could he? She sat up and touched the thing on her abdomen. It was warm and comfortable, and her entire body felt much more relaxed. The next morning, Jean Wan woke up on time. She lazily prepared to eat breakfast before heading to work. After all, she was here on a business trip. After sleeping here for a whole day, she felt much better. After washing up, a staff member suddenly knocked on the door and pushed in a bowl of red date glutinous rice porridge. "Don't you need to eat breakfast in the restaurant?" "I didn't even call, and it was sent in directly." Jean Wan spoke as she walked over and picked up the spoon to taste it. The staff member stood by the side and asked with a smile, "Miss G, is this porridge good?" "It's all right. The taste is not bad." "Why?" Jean Wan took 2 mouthfuls and sat down by the table, planning to finish the porridge. This porridge was specially made by Mr. Mo in the hotel kitchen this morning. There are red dates, brown sugar, glutinous rice, peanuts, and even some milk and walnuts. It's even richer than the 8 treasures porridge. Mr. Mo cooked it for a long time. Jean Wan paused in her actions. No wonder she felt that the porridge in this hotel was too meticulous. It was especially soft and sweet but not greasy. She originally wanted to say that the environment of this hotel was not only rated as a 7-star hotel, but even this bowl of porridge could be rated as a very high level of culinary skills. He took up the hotel kitchen and specially cooked porridge for her. Was this considered an apology? No matter how much he calculated, he failed to account for the changes in her menstrual cycle, causing her to run to Jing City during the most difficult days. It turned out that the calm, rational, and well-planned Mo Jingshan would also have times when he miscalculated. Jean Wan drank the porridge and said indifferently, "Mr. Mo took up your kitchen, but what about the others' breakfast? It can't be that the entire hotel didn't have breakfast this morning, right?" The staff member smiled. "That's not necessarily the case. There are 3 kitchens in our hotel. Mr. Mo only took up one, and it didn't affect our breakfast preparation." Jean Wan did not speak anymore and lowered her head to continue drinking. Mo Jingshan really made a lot of porridge. From the looks of this big bowl, it should have been cooked for a long time. Jean Wan happened to like it, so she drank it all up. Then she stood up and asked the staff to push the dining cart out. She then tidied up and prepared to go out. Chapter 550. In the room, Jin Wan's cell phone just rang. Mo Jingshan came out from the opposite room, heard her cell phone ringing, and glanced at the empty bowls on the dining trolley that the staff pushed out. It seemed that she liked it very much. At the same time, Xiaohu suddenly came out of the elevator with a huge bouquet of roses. When he came here and saw Mo Jingshan standing outside the door, he was embarrassed. CEO Mo, the man looked sideways at the things in his hand. The 299 red roses were tender and beautiful. Mo Jingshan frowned silently. What are these? These flowers. Xiaohu coughed. Just now, the courier from the same city came and said they are for CEO G. At this time, Jin Wan suddenly opened the door and came out, seeing the bouquet in Xiaohu's arms. She subconsciously raised her eyes to look at Mo Jingshan. Although she knew that everything Mo Jingshan had done for her was deeper and more important than these flowers, and she knew that he would never have such superficial things. He rarely gave roses or gifts, but these flowers suddenly appeared in front of him. It seemed that it was not the case. Just now, she received a call from the same city, saying that a gentleman had ordered roses for her. Apart from Mo Jingshan and Xiaohu, there was only one other person who knew that she was staying in this hotel. Yesterday, when she was resting in the hotel, she was bored to death, so she took a picture of the hotel from this angle and posted it on her WeChat Moments with the words, "This business trip is really painful." During the last blind date, the auntie's son didn't specifically contact her again, but the two of them added each other on WeChat. After seeing her post on WeChat, the auntie's son asked where she was on a business trip and said that he happened to be in Beijing these few days, so he asked if she wanted to meet him. Then Jin Wan refused. After chatting casually for a while, he learned that she was staying in this hotel, but Jin Wan said it was not convenient for her to meet friends, so he didn't come to see her. Unexpectedly, this morning, he sent a bouquet of roses over. She understood that he wanted to show his affection for her. But this bouquet was sent to Mo Jingshan. Xiaohu stood there holding the bouquet, not daring to look at Mo Jingshan's face. Seeing that Jin Wan had come out, he instinctively wanted to give the bouquet to her. Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes. "Bring it over and put it down." Xiaohu paused. Just as the flower was about to fall into Jin Wan's arms, he abruptly turned around and decisively put the flower on the dining car closest to Mo Jingshan. Then he quickly backed away from the danger ahead. They were fresh red roses that had just been picked and shipped to China by air. There were still clean water droplets on them, and they were delicate and lovely. Mo Jingshan glanced at the heart-shaped card on the flower and pulled it out with his well-defined fingers. He held it between his fingers and glanced at it. Then his expression turned dark and cold. Before Jin Wan could react, she saw the man throw the card into the garbage truck of the guest room cleaning staff passing by. Jin Wan instantly glared at him in disbelief. Mo Jingshan, why did you throw my things? She felt ashamed that she had been moved and soft-hearted by him just now. Mo Jingshan glanced at the irksome rose again and then his eyes fell on her face. Since you like red roses, I'll send you a bouquet every day. I don't want that. Then there's no need for this bouquet, the man said indifferently. He casually picked up the bouquet and was about to throw it into the garbage truck when it was about to be pushed over. Jin Wan hurriedly rushed over. Just as the bouquet of roses was about to fall cruelly into the garbage truck, she stepped forward and hugged the man's raised arm. He sent me flowers with good intentions. What right do you have to ruin what he sent me? Mo Jingshan looked down at the little woman and narrowed his eyes. He remembered that before the divorce, there were many men who courted Jin Wan and sent many flowers to her studio, but they were all rejected by her or thrown out. At that time, she was very decisive and did not allow any man to approach her. Now, just because she was not bound by marriage, she could even say that she didn't want to ruin other people's good intentions? He stared at her with his black eyes. For the sake of snatching flowers, you were so agile when you rushed over? Doesn't your stomach hurt anymore? There was a hint of danger in his words. Jin Wan glanced at him, turned back to the room with the flowers, and closed the door with a bang. Mo Jingshan looked at the closed door in front of him and felt his temples suddenly jump. It was hard for him to find some warmth, but it was interrupted by such a sudden bouquet of flowers. He shouldn't have kept the man who had a blind date with her in the first place. In the morning, Jin Wan went to an exhibition hall in Beijing with Shine Group in the name of MN Group to visit and do some exchange work. Because there would be a very important exchange dinner in the evening, she took the time to go back to the hotel at noon to rest. She had just had porridge in the morning and didn't want to eat too cold or too bland at noon, so she took advantage of the lunch break to find a small shop nearby to eat a big bowl of rice noodles. Finally, with a full stomach, she warmly strolled back to the hotel. However, as soon as she entered the room, she saw that the large bouquet of 299 flowers she had placed in the room was gone, leaving only 3 red roses in a slender glass vase. She stared at the 3 roses. Because the roses given to her by the auntie's son were very expensive, they weren't ordinary roses that cost a few yuan on the market. Therefore, she could recognize them at a glance. These 3 roses were 3 of her 299 roses. Jin Wan abruptly walked out and knocked on Mo Jingshan's door. When the door opened, the man who had just changed his clothes glanced at her and moved aside. At the same time, he casually adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, asking mildly, "Didn't you say you were coming back to rest? Are you planning to enter my room to rest?" With that, the man turned and entered, indicating that she didn't need to be polite. Jin Wan stood in front of the door and saw that there was a similar glass vase on the table in his room, with the same 3 roses in it. "Mo Jingshan, where are my flowers?" After Jin Wan asked, she watched as the man buttoned up his cuffs, put one hand in his trouser pocket, and said calmly, "It's too wasteful to leave such expensive and beautiful Bulgarian red roses in your room to be exposed to the sun and wither. I asked Xiao Hu to take them out and send them to the housekeeping department and ask them to give a few to each room." Chapter 551. The man chuckled, his eyes indifferent, and his tone calm. "Didn't you say you don't want to ruin other people's good intentions? This Xingtang hotel happens to have Shine Group's investment. A good resting environment coupled with beautiful roses can add points to the hotel's image. Instead of letting the roses wither, it's better to make the best use of it. What do you think?" You don't have to thank me." "Who would thank him?" Jin Wan glared at him angrily and reached out to him. "If I really stay here with you for half a month, will you be able to enter my room whenever you want? Give me my room card." The man pinched her cheeks and lowered his eyes, looking at her indifferently and indulgently. "Don't be naughty. Didn't you say you came back to rest? Go." Jin Wan raised her hand to slap his hand away, but the man withdrew his hand right before she could do so. Jin Wan's slap hit nothing but air. Jin Wan, this bastard. It was just a bouquet of roses. She hadn't even seen the card on the bouquet. Now even the roses were gone. There were only 3 left for her. "Give me back the room card first." The man saw that she was obsessed with the room card, and his dark, deep eyes fell on the white, tender hand she raised. "I have thousands of ways to get in. It doesn't matter if the room card is with me or not." Jin Wan didn't expect Mo Jingshan to admit it so directly. He was directly admitting that he brought her to Jing City this time to open the door for him. He even said that it was a rare opportunity for MN Group and that he had to cooperate with her due to the busy work in Jing City. In the past 2 days, apart from sleeping in the hotel, she went out with him to see exhibitions or eat and drink. At night, she was only going to attend a dinner party. How was this work? He clearly dragged her here to take a vacation in the name of a business trip. And he could enter her room just because he said so. Forget it. At most, she could change to another hotel. Shengtang Hotel was a hotel invested by the Shine Group in Jing City. She couldn't afford to offend him, but she could hide from him. Jin Wan was so angry that she didn't speak and turned to leave. However, before she could walk out of the room, the man's faint voice came from behind her. don't even think about changing hotels. Many of our itineraries are tied together on this trip to Beijing. You can't stay too far away, or it will only delay the trip. Also, the other hotels nearby are all cooperating with Shine Group. After all, this is the best location in Beijing. Shine Group will definitely not let go of such an investment that is destined to increase in value. Jean Wan's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. She didn't look back but rolled her eyes hard at the carpet in the corridor outside the door. When Mo Jingshan was abstinent and cold, he appeared like a flower on a high mountain, making it hard for people to approach him. However, once this man began to thicken his skin, it really made people sigh. 4. Observe. Stop. During the lunch break, Jean Wan returned to her room and stood by the door to study how to lock the door from the inside. In the afternoon, she went to another place in Beijing to attend an exhibition. Because there was a banquet that was said to be very important in the evening, Jean Wan found time to find a custom-made dress shop. She chose a low-key, simple, nude strapless gown. The dress was embroidered with silk flowers and ultralight ruffles, and a few crystals decorated the chiffon and chiffon base so that it was not too ostentatious but not too elegant. There were also 2 delicate feather bone designs and soft chiffon fabric on the shoulders, which made the entire gown look very elegant. Because it was a strapless style, Jean Wan's beautiful collarbones were enough to match the gown perfectly. Obviously, she only needed a simple necklace, and she didn't need to add any other accessories. From head to toe, she was gorgeous, elegant, mysterious, and exquisite. She completely gathered the temperament and texture at many socialites and rich ladies in the upper class yearned for but couldn't completely merge with. Jean Wan didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to say. When she was helped out of the fitting room by the dress designer, Jean Wan hadn't put on her high heels yet. The designer brought her a pair of nude stilettos that matched the gown very well. As soon as she put them on, she stared at the center of her collarbone in front of the mirror outside. Because of the lack of a necklace, it looked perfect but vaguely missing something. She had never worn the blue diamond with her. Ever since she found out the price of the blue diamond and its status in the global jewelry industry, she had left it at home. Of course, it was impossible for her to bring it with her on this business trip. She was standing in front of the mirror in a daze. Behind her, a tall and handsome man appeared in her mirror and approached her from behind. Through the dressing mirror in front of him, Mo Jingshan looked at Jean Wan in the mirror, at the woman's delicate face with a little makeup, at her standing in front of the mirror in a daze, not knowing what she was thinking, and finally, his eyes fell on the center of her collarbone. The man looked at her calmly. Jean Wan was very beautiful. This was an indisputable fact, but she had never deliberately dressed up in front of him. In the past 3 years, she no longer tried to hide her brilliance as low-key as before. In the past 3 years, she often wore bright red, sexy strappy dresses, stunning everyone, and even turned her originally harmless beauty into a very lethal weapon in the London business world. This time, if it weren't for the fact that she didn't intend to be too presumptuous in Jing City, she wouldn't have dressed so low-key. But even if she was low-key, it couldn't hide her beauty. She could even control any style of gown, any color, any style, and it was enough to amaze people when she wore it. Like all dress customization centers, there was generally a jewelry store near such a store, and the nearest store next door was a well-known luxury jewelry store in France. Under the careful questioning eyes of the staff here, Mo Jingshan acquiesced to them to help Jean Wan choose a suitable necklace. After trying on the dress, Jean Wan was taken inside by the stylist to have her hair styled, but because her dress was very simple, her hairstyle was very elegant, similar to that of Hans. After doing all the styling, she returned to the dressing room and waited. After all, the dressing room of this store was very large, but because she said she would go in to rest, no one dared to go in casually. She was alone. There were all kinds of gorgeous and dazzling gowns hanging around. The white palace-style design and the 2 white sofas here allowed her to find a comfortable position to sit down and rest in this complicated dress. Anyway, there were still more than 3 hours before the dinner party, so she was in no hurry to leave. Chapter 552. What are you doing here? Isn't there a VIP lounge outside? Jean Wan said as she smoothed out the hem of her dress. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw the man's legs were approaching her. His dark-colored trousers were neatly ironed, and his black leather shoes stepped down the 3 marble steps behind the door of the dressing room. Seeing her sitting on the sofa motionless, Mo Jingshan looked at the hem of her dress that she had deliberately smoothed out with her hand and asked indifferently, "Is your stomach uncomfortable again?" "No, it's much better today than yesterday." Although Jean Wan said so, her stomach did ache faintly, but it was not as painful as it was on the first day of her period yesterday, and she specially bought a heat pad at the nearby supermarket at noon, so it didn't hurt as much now. She said again, "Isn't it a few hours before we go to the banquet venue? Anyway, the dress has been changed and the hairstyle has been done. I don't want to waste time, so I'll just sit here and rest for a while." Mo Jingshan's eyes swept over her lightly made-up face and he could see that she was in good condition. "Come here." "What are you doing?" The man's eyes fell on her and he did not speak. Jean Wan looked at him speechlessly for a while, got up, and walked over. Although the pair of high heels on her feet matched this dress very well, the soles of the heels were high and thin. The tallest one she had worn in London was only 10 centimeters, but this one was 13 centimeters high. As a result, when Jean Wan walked up to Mo Jingshan, she was even more aware of the height difference between them. She had grown more than 10 centimeters out of thin air, but she was still half a head short of this man. It turned out that she wasn't the same height as him in the past. She probably only reached up to his shoulder. It turned out that she had been deceiving herself for so long. Mo Jingshan ignored the woman's eyes that were sizing up the height difference between the two of them and watched her swaying as she approached. "Are your shoes uncomfortable?" "No, I was sitting in the wrong posture just now, and my legs are numb." Jean Wan was still able to handle the high heels. They were standing in the middle of the large dressing room, and the huge floor-to-ceiling mirror on the wall reflected their figures. Mo Jingshan gestured for her to look at the mirror. Jean Wan turned her eyes in confusion, but because her shoes were too high, she couldn't turn for too long, so she turned around and faced the mirror. "What's wrong? Is there anything wrong with my style? Or is there something wrong with my makeup today that will make you lose face?" However, the man lifted the few pieces of gauze on her shoulders. She thought there was something wrong with the back of her gown and was about to speak, but the man's kiss fell on her shoulder. Jean Wan's eyes were still fixed on the mirror. She watched as the man's kiss fell on her shoulder. Before she could react, he gently held her waist under the dress and kissed her white neck. Her neck was also her sensitive spot. Jean Wan shivered and was about to avoid him when the hand on her waist suddenly tightened, trapping her in his arms, and the kiss on her neck gradually became heavier. When Jean Wan noticed what the man was doing, she frowned. "Mo Jingshan, if you dare to leave any marks on my neck." Before she finished speaking, she felt a sharp pain from the place on her neck covered by the man's soft lips. She stared at the man in the mirror in disbelief, only to see that he had no intention of letting go. He even naughtily extended the kiss to the back of her ear. When Jean Wan's eyes were about to spit fire, he curved his lips against her ear, and his low, husky, and indifferent voice fell into her ears. "You've left a mark. What should I do? Why don't you leave a few more marks?" Jean Wan angrily turned back to slap him, but before she could turn around, the man easily put his arm around her waist and held her in her original position in front of the mirror. At the same time, a necklace appeared in his hand. She recognized at a glance that it was the classic white diamond necklace from VCA. Some of the classic white diamond necklaces of VCA's family were not the ordinary thin necklaces on the market, but were shaped like geometric patterns. The white diamond was arranged in a regular pattern on a polygonal star, dazzling but not ostentatious. The width of one side of the necklace was just enough to cover the kiss mark left on her neck by Mo Jingshan. Under this necklace, only heaven, earth, him, and her knew this ambiguous mark, and no one else could see it. Seeing that the mark was covered, Jin-won choked back the angry rebuke on the tip of her tongue. This black-bellied and shameless man. She didn't know how many times she had scolded him in her heart recently. Shameless, black-bellied, shameless. She scolded him over and over again in her heart every day, but she still couldn't vent her hatred. After helping her put on the necklace, the man's slender and well-defined fingers rubbed the soft flesh under her ear. Jin-won shivered again, wondering if he would even buy her earrings. The result was as he expected. Mo Jingshan picked up a pair of matching diamond earrings and compared them under her ears. Although this was the first time he had worn something like this on a woman, a man's innate sensitivity and adaptability allowed him to quickly find which earring to wear on which side. After putting them on, the man was obviously very satisfied with his masterpiece. He tugged at the earring she was wearing and watched the shiny thing swaying under her white, soft ears. The man's eyes couldn't help but deepen. Jin-won pursed her lips and said with a straight face, "Ceomo, these diamonds are too exaggerated." The man smiled, but his smile was cold. "Aren't roses exaggerated?" She knew it. The stalk of the roses couldn't be crossed for the time being. "According to what you said, after I wear these to the party tonight, can I take off all the diamonds on them and give them to others one by one? Just like how you gave my roses." The man's smile didn't diminish, but she could clearly feel that the air around him had dropped 2 degrees. "Jin-won, are you picking on me?" Jin-won pursed her lips, glanced at him, and ignored him. This was a dressing room. There shouldn't be any surveillance cameras in it. If Mo Jingshan shamelessly wanted to make a few more small strawberries on her shoulders and neck, she wouldn't be able to go out to see anyone tonight. And she was deeply aware that even if she was protected by her aunt, if this man really wanted to argue with her, she was afraid that even if she bled in front of him, it would be useless. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.